Chapter 33-24. Hearing this, Dan Wang's hand that was stroking his beard paused. He pondered for a moment, then said, if his parents are still alive and have the ability to protect him, then he should indeed return to his birth parents. Although he is only 6 years old, he has been intelligent since he was a child. When the time comes, you can talk to him and see what he thinks. Regarding his past, you can't hide it from him forever. We didn't want to hide it from him forever. We originally planned to tell him when we were about to leave. As Xianyuan Mo spoke, he watched the 7 colored clouds in the sky gradually disperse. The night returned to normal, and the stars shone in the sky. It's getting late. Fengjiu probably won't come out until tomorrow. You should go back and rest too. Dan Wang said, then walked away with his hands behind his back. After Dan Wang left, Xianyuan Mo also walked away and returned to his cave to rest. The next day, as soon as the sky brightened, he got up and went outside to wait for Fengjiu to come out. In the cave, Fengjiu exhaled softly, then slowly opened her eyes. The moment she opened her eyes, a faint smile appeared on her face. She had finally succeeded in becoming a divine king expert. In the past 5 years, apart from her master guiding their cultivation, he had also researched and concocted pills for advancement with her. Otherwise, she and Mose wouldn't have been able to break through to the divine king level in just 5 years. Sitting cross-legged, she released her divine sense and saw the people waiting for her outside the cave. When she saw them, the smile on her face deepened. Only then did she get up and walk out. Father, when is mother coming out? How? Asked, holding Xianyuan Mo's hand. His eyes occasionally glanced towards the cave. She'll be out in a while. Xianyuan Mo said, his gaze falling on the cave. Lang Hua and the others also looked towards the cave. They couldn't hide their excitement. Master was finally coming out of seclusion. Not long after, a red figure walked out from inside and appeared in front of everyone. Everyone's eyes lit up when they saw the beautiful woman in red with her hair hanging down to her hips. Mother! Hao ran over happily and threw himself at Fengjiu. Fengjiu bent down and picked him up. He smiled and said, Hao has grown taller again. Mother, Hao misses you. He intimately hugged her neck, his delicate little face flushed red. The little man buried his head in her neck, unwilling to leave. When Fengjiu heard this and saw that he was hugging him tightly, he also laughed. Mother, I miss Hao. Congratulations, Master, for successfully breaking through to the God King realm. Lang Hua and the others stepped forward and bowed respectfully as they congratulated him. When the other people in the valley saw this, they smiled and congratulated, Congratulations young valley master. Congratulations young valley master. Ha ha ha, little girl, not bad. Dan Wang smiled and nodded. He looked at her with satisfaction. Master. Fengjiu called out and said, if not for Master's guidance, I wouldn't have advanced so quickly. It's all because of Liang Zun that I'm where I am today. When Dan Wang heard this, he waved his hand. Sigh, this has nothing to do with me. It's all because of you, one step at a time. Then, he said to everyone, today, the valley has to celebrate. Everyone, get ready. Later, we'll dig out all the wine that little Feng brewed a few years ago to drink. Chapter 33-25. Let's go dig for wine. Let's go help in the kitchen. They all spoke excitedly. After cupping their hands, they left, leaving only the few of them there. Master, Yama Lord, let's go help, Lang Hua said. He left with Hui Lang and the others. Little master, I'll take you to see them dig for wine, Leng Shuang said. He came to Fengjiu and looked at Hao looked at his mother and then at his father. Then he said to Fengjiu, Mother, I'll go play with Aunt Shuang first. He got down from Fengjiu's arms and held Leng Shuang's hand. He looked at Xianyuan Mo's and said, Father, how, will come back later. Go. Xian Yuanmo's nodded. Fengjiu came to his side and wrapped his arms around his waist. She hugged him and buried her face in his chest. She smiled and said, "I've been in seclusion for more than a year. Did you miss me?" Xian Yuanmo's hugged her and rested his chin on her head. He smiled and said, "Yes. One word was better than 1,000 words." They stood in each other's arms and didn't say anything. They just quietly enjoyed the warmth of this moment. After a long time, they let go. Xian Yuanmo's held her hand and looked into the distance. He said, "Now that you're out, we have to find a time to leave." Du Fan and the others sent news that the situation outside isn't very good. Especially since Sovereign Tong Tian wants to attack the big sections. The situation outside is very dangerous. 5 years have passed. I wonder how much Sovereign Tongtian's strength has improved. Fengjiu said thoughtfully. He still had the ancient fierce beasts by his side. If they fought, they wouldn't be completely overwhelmed. We can discuss this after we get out of here. What do you plan to do about Hao? Xian Yuanmo's looked at her and asked. Hearing this, Fengjiu paused for a moment and said, Hao is already 6 years old. If we didn't know who his biological parents were, we wouldn't be in a hurry to tell him since he has been raised by us. But since we know his background, we should tell him before we leave Danwang Valley. Xian Yuanmo's nodded. Yes, I think so too. 5 years have passed. I think Elder Mei will want to bring him back this time. Fengjiu smiled and said, in any case, we have raised him for 5 or 6 years. If you want to take him away from us, if his parents don't come personally, then you won't be able to take him away. She had raised her son for 5 or 6 years. How could she let anyone take him away so easily? If his parents didn't come in person, she didn't want to return their son to them. Listening to her words, Xian Yuanmo's hooked his lips and smiled, that's right, we have raised our son for 5 or 6 years. How can they take him back so easily? Let's go. We'll go to the stream at the back of the mountain to watch them dig for wine. As for Hao's background, we'll tell him at night. Fengjiu said as she held his hand and led him to the back of the mountain. On this day, because Fengjiu had come out of seclusion, everyone in the valley was very happy. Everyone got busy. The valley hadn't been so happy and lively in a long time. It could be said that no one was idle from morning to evening. At night, the table was filled with food and wine. Everyone sat around and drank together. It was a harmonious scene. There were no disputes, no robberies and killings outside. There was only peace and ordinary. Chapter 33-26. Mother, look at those 2 stars. They're so bright. Hao pointed at 2 unusually bright stars in the sky. Xian Yuanmo's and Fengjiu looked up and smiled at each other. Those 2 stars were the Emperor Star and the Phoenix Star. Although they were bright in the past, they were never as dazzling as tonight. If they could see that the Emperor Star and the Phoenix Star were so dazzling, others probably noticed as well. Hao, your father and I have something to tell you tonight. You have to listen carefully, Fengjiu looked at him and said seriously. Hearing this, Hao blinked. Seeing the rare seriousness on their faces, he couldn't help but sit up straight and nod seriously. Yes, Hao will listen carefully. Xian Yuanmo's and Fengjiu looked at each other and paused. In the end, they decided that she should be the one to speak. She looked at Hao who was sitting between them, and said softly, Hao we're actually not your biological parents. Hearing this, Hao who was sitting up straight, froze. His eyes widened and he looked at Fengjiu in astonishment. Mother, what did you say? Hao we're not your biological parents. Fengjiu looked at his panicked expression and her heart clenched. Mother, are you drunk? Hao's eyes were filled with panic and fear. His eyes gradually turned red and a layer of mist covered them. His small hands tightly grasped her hand. "Mother, are you drunk? How is your biological son? How is your biological son?" As he spoke, his tears fell. His little mouth was tightly pursed, and he forced himself not to cry. It was the first time such a small person faced such a situation. For a moment, it felt as if the entire sky had collapsed. He was very panicked and helpless. A pair of hands gently stroked his head and pulled him into an embrace. Fengjiu sighed softly and said softly, "How, don't cry. It's all right. Even if you're not our biological son, you're still our son." Feeling the warmth of his mother's embrace, feeling the gentleness from her body, his panicked heart gradually calmed down. He raised his head and hugged her tightly. His voice choked as he asked, "Really? Mother, even if Hao isn't father and mother's biological son, will father and mother still want me? You're the son we've raised for 5 or 6 years. How could we not want you?" As Xianyuanmo spoke, he reached out his hand to rub his hair and said, "Your mother and I are telling you this because we want you to know your background. After we leave Danwang Valley this time, perhaps not long after, your birth parents will come knocking on our door. I don't want them. I only want you." Hao hurriedly said and buried himself in Fengjiu's arms. When the two saw this, they couldn't help but shake their heads and smile. "Hao, don't you want to know how you became our son?" Hearing this, Hao blinked his slightly red eyes. He thought for a moment and sat up straight. However, one hand was still tightly holding Fengjiu's hand. He said, "I want to know. Mother, where did Hao come from?" Chapter 33-27. Seeing him in a daze, Fengjiu couldn't help but laugh. "Your father and I didn't have children yet, so we raised you as our own. As we raised you, you're already so big. At first, we didn't know about your background, but later, an old man came to our house. He's called Elder Mei. Fengjiu hugged him and told him about him bit by bit. Hao leaned in her arms and listened attentively until she finished. That's it. So, when we leave Danwang Valley in a few days, we have to tell you about your background first. Do you understand now? It's not that father and mother don't want you. Even if we tell you this, you're still our son," Fengjiu said softly. She looked at Hao, who had calmed down, with a smile in her eyes. It was indeed not easy for a 6-year-old child to calm down so quickly. "Mother, after leaving Danwang Valley, Hao only wants to stay by father and mother's side. He didn't know his biological parents. Ever since he could remember, father and mother had been by his side. They taught him how to walk, how to speak, how to read, and how to cultivate. He knew that they had always doted on him, so he never doubted that he wasn't their biological son." Xianyuanmo and Fengjiu smiled and said, "We'll talk about this later. It's late, go back and sleep." As they spoke, they stood up and each of them took one of his hands to send him back to his cave residence to rest. After sending him back to his cave residence, the two of them went to the hot spring pool in Danwang Valley. They planned to take a bath before going back to rest. In the middle of the night, the valley was already quiet. Only the occasional sound of insects could be heard in the air. The two of them took a bath in the hot spring. After about the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, they got up and went back to their cave residence. What they didn't know was that Hao couldn't sleep that night. He couldn't sleep the whole night. His mind kept thinking about the things they told him. He digested the things they told him alone and couldn't fall asleep until dawn. In the end, he got up early, washed up, and went to sit outside his parents' cave residence alone, waiting for them to wake up. "Hao, why are you here?" Early in the morning, Leng Hua saw the little figure curled up into a ball and sitting in front of his master's cave. He immediately walked over to him and asked, "Uncle Hua." Hao looked up at him and then lowered his head again. He buried his head between his knees and said in a muffled voice, "Father and mother told that is not their biological son." Leng Hua was slightly startled when he heard this, and then he smiled warmly. Do your parents treat you well?" "All right, father and mother treat the best. They love the most." He raised his head and said. "That's right. All these years, they've been so good to you, treating you like their own son. So what if you're not their biological son? You just need to know that they're good to you, right?" Thought for a moment and nodded. "Yes, mother said so too. Mother and father said that I'm still their son. Isn't that enough? No matter what, you're still their son. That won't change." Leng Hua patted his head and said warmly, "You're sitting here so early in the morning. If your mother comes out and sees you, her heart will ache." Chapter 33:28. Hearing this, Leng Hua smiled warmly and said, "Let's go. I'll take you to eat something." Leng Hua took his hand and led him to the kitchen to see if there was anything for him to eat. As the sky gradually brightened, the first ray of sunlight shone into the valley. At the stone table in the kitchen, Leng Hua sat at the table and looked at Er's flushed face from drinking hot porridge. He couldn't help but smile. "Uncle Hua, mother said that we're leaving Dan Wang Valley. Will we come back in the future?" Put down his spoon and looked at him. He grew up here and liked the people here very much. He just didn't know if he could come back in the future. "If you want to come back in the future, let your mother bring you back to stay for a few days." Leng Hua said, "However, the outside world is more exciting. Maybe you'll like it more after you go out. Is it fun outside? Father doesn't allow me to be playful. I want to cultivate." Blinked and asked, "Uncle Hua, are there a lot of bad people outside?" Leng Hua smiled and said warmly, "There are bad people and good people. You have to learn to distinguish them yourself. Uncle Hua, tell me about the outside world." He sat up straight and looked at him with a pair of clear eyes. "Okay," he said warmly. He sat here and told him about the outside world. When it was close to noon, they were heading back and happened to meet Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu. "Father, mother." Trotted forward. Have you eaten?" Fengjiu rubbed his hair and asked with a smile. "Yes," he said and looked at the two of them. "Father, mother, when are we leaving?" Uncle Hua said that there are a lot of fun and delicious things outside. In the future, can play enough before cultivating? Hearing this, the two of them looked at each other and smiled. "Of course. When we reach our house, mother will accompany to play outside and eat delicious food." "Great. Thank you, mother." He hugged her hand and smiled happily. At this moment, Fengjiu looked at Leng Hua and said, "Go and get them ready. We'll leave soon." "Yes," he replied and left first. Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu brought to eat first. Not long after, they came to Dan Wang's cave residence. "Young Valley Master, you're here." The Valley Master is inside. The two cultivators guarding the cave said and invited them in. The two of them nodded and walked inside. When they arrived, they saw Dan Wang sitting at the stone table drinking tea. Seeing that they had arrived, he gestured for them to sit down. "Are you guys leaving?" Dan Wang asked, his gaze falling on them. "Master, we're here to say goodbye. We're preparing to leave soon," Fengjiu said and sat down with Xianyuan Mose and Dan Wang nodded. "That's good. You'll have to leave sooner or later. It's fine to go back earlier. However, when you go back this time, you should also be preparing for your wedding, right?" A smile appeared on Xianyuan Mose's face. He glanced at Fengjiu and said, "Yes, after we go back and arrange everything, we'll prepare for our wedding. When the time comes, we'll send the invitation." Chapter 33-29. Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mose stood up at the same time and solemnly bowed to him. Take care. Grandpa, Hao will come back to see you in the future, Hao said, imitating them and bowing respectfully. Good, good, good. Dan Wang smiled and nodded, gently patting him on the shoulder. Good boy, remember to listen to your parents and cultivate hard. Grandpa, don't worry. Hao will be obedient, he promised with a serious face. Dan Wang sent them out and said, I'm old and can't bear to part. I won't send you off. You can go on your own. Master, take care, Fengjiu said, then left with Xianyuan Mose with Hao. They went back to their cave and simply packed up. The group went to the grassy area. Xianyuan Mose formed a seal with his hands and drew in the air. A whirlpool appeared. Let's go. He looked at Leng Hua and the others, motioning for them to go in first. Leng Hua and Leng Shuang went in first, followed by Hui Lang and Ning Yi. Fengjiu carried Hao and Xianyuan Mose into the whirlpool together. With a flash of light, the whirlpool disappeared. Along with them, they also disappeared from Dan Wang's valley. In the evening a purple gold spirit deer carriage sped along the mountain path. It was so fast that it looked like it was flying. However, although the purple gold spirit deer could fly, they didn't fly into the air. Instead, they ran on the ground, stirring up a cloud of dust. Leng Hua and Leng Shuang sat in the front, driving the purple gold spirit deer carriage. In the dark, Hui Lang and Ning Yi followed. Along the way, the cultivators automatically made way, not daring to block them. When a group of mercenaries saw the violet gold spirit deer carriage galloping towards them, some of them widened their eyes, while others gasped. Only the leader of the mercenaries suddenly came back to his senses. He quickly shouted in a low voice and ordered them to make way. After the spirit deer carriage flew past them, a mercenary asked, Captain, those two are purple gold spirit deer, right? Am I seeing things? Is that really the purple gold spirit deer? Purple gold spirit deer. Using the purple gold spirit deer to pull the carriage. Who is the person sitting inside? Purple gold spirit deer are extremely rare. It shouldn't be difficult to know the identity of the people inside the carriage. As the team members spoke, they all looked at their captain in unison. Captain, do you know who's inside? The mercenary leader pondered and said, I've heard that the master of the two venerables of the Blue Star Immortal sect is Fengjiu, the ghost doctor. Back then, they offered 2 purple gold spirit deer to their master. The leader said, frowning, it's just that the ghost doctor Fengjiu has been missing for 5 years. There's been no news of her. How could she suddenly appear? But if it's not her, then who could it be? They're heading towards Four Corner City. Maybe it's really the ghost Dr. Fengjiu. Now that the various sects are gathering experts to help, they're going to fight the Sovereign of Heaven reaching. Maybe the ghost Dr. Fengjiu heard the news and rushed back. Chapter 33:30. While they were discussing, the spirit deer carriage had already disappeared without a trace. Even the dust that was kicked up along the way gradually dissipated. The next morning, when Fengjiu's purple gold spirit deer carriage appeared in Four Corner City, almost all of the family clans in Four Corner City were shocked. What? Purple gold spirit deer carriage? Could it be that the ghost Dr. Fengjiu and the others have returned? Quick! Send people to ask around. See if they've returned. Every family and faction sent people out to ask around. After hearing the news, they could not sit still. They wanted to go check out the situation, but because they did not have any relations with the Feng Manor, they could not find a reason to visit. As a result, the Shao family became the target of everyone's inquiries. Shao Manor. When the head of the Shao family heard that the purple gold spirit deer carriage had appeared in Four Corner City, his first thought was that Fengjiu and the others had returned. She couldn't sit still any longer. She got someone to prepare a gift and brought her 2 sons to pay a visit. At this time, in the Feng manor, Du Fan and the others found out that Fengjiu had returned today. They waited outside the manor early in the morning, especially Elder Mei, who was extremely excited. He opened the gates before dawn and waited outside for them to return. Haha, that's great. Xiao Jiu and the others have finally returned. I'm really looking forward to it. Guan Shilin's clear voice came from inside the manor, as he ordered Qin Xian, tell the kitchen to prepare. Xiao Jiu and the others will definitely want to eat when they return. Prepare some dishes that they like to eat. Qin Xian also revealed a smile and said, Big brother Guan, don't worry. The kitchen has been busy since before dawn. We're just waiting for Master and the others to return. Has the courtyard been tidied up? Guan Shilin worriedly asked. It's already been tidied up. We can move in at any time. Qin Xian said. Then that's good. Let's go. We'll go outside and wait for them. Guan Shilin said, as he walked outside. Luo Yu and the others craned their necks and waited at the gate. When they saw the familiar purple gold spirit deer carriage slowly approaching, they immediately smiled happily. It's here, it's here. Master and the others are here. The crowd gathered outside the mansion. Even some other people were watching from a distance. Their eyes fell on the spirit deer carriage. Only when the spirit deer carriage stopped did they start to whisper. They've been gone for 5 years. I didn't expect them to come back. Yes. I thought they wouldn't come back. I didn't expect this. It's just that 5 years have passed, I wonder if their strength has become stronger. That's for sure. It's just that we don't know how strong they are. As these people were talking in low voices, they saw Leng Shuang and Leng Hua, who were sitting in front of the spirit deer carriage, getting off the carriage first. Everyone in front of the mansion's gate went up to greet them. Leng Hua, you're finally back. Leng Shuang, I haven't seen you in 5 years. You haven't changed at all. Du Fan and the others said happily. After greeting the 2 of them, they looked at the carriage. At this time, Leng Hua and Leng Shuang nodded to the crowd and lifted the curtain of the carriage. Yama Lord, Master, we've arrived at the gate. After the curtain of the carriage was lifted, everyone immediately saluted respectfully. Yama Lord, Master. In the carriage, the 3 people sitting inside looked outside. Xianyuan Mose got up and walked out first. Then he stood beside the carriage and held Fengjiu's hand. As for Hao, he was carried down by Leng Shuang. Chapter 33-31. Master. Du Fan and the others couldn't help but call out again. They were very excited. Xiao Jiu. Guan Shilin walked over from behind and looked at them happily. Xiao Jiu, Mose, long time no see. Brother. Fengjiu was happy to see him. Brother, when did you come? Are you the only one here? I've been here for a while. I'm the only one here. Come, let's go inside and talk. As Guan Shilin spoke, he looked at Xianyuan Mose and couldn't help but reach out and pat him on the shoulder. It seems that the past 5 years have been very exciting. Although he couldn't see their strength, he could clearly feel that they were much stronger than before. Xianyuan Mose smiled and said, not bad. Little Hao, don't you recognize me? Guan Shilin came in front of Hao, and reached out to pick him up. The little guy is already so big. Hao, call uncle. Fengjiu smiled and looked at Hao, indicating for him to call him uncle. Uncle. Hao, called out obediently. Good boy. Guan Shilin rubbed his head and said with a smile. Hao, blinked and looked at Guan Shilin curiously. Seeing that he didn't look like his beautiful mother at all, he couldn't help but ask curiously, Uncle, why do you look different from my mother? His mother was so beautiful, but his uncle looked, he seemed to be too strong. Was it because he ate too much? Because we're sworn siblings. Naturally, we look different. Guan Shilin said with a smile as he carried him inside. When Hao heard this, his heart skipped a beat. No one knew what he was thinking, but his eyes kept moving between his uncle and his mother. The more he thought about it, the brighter his eyes became. They were not blood-related siblings, just like him. They were not blood-related children, but mother treated him very well, as if he was her own child. Uncle was the same. He was not mother's blood-related elder brother, but mother treated him like a blood-related elder brother. As if he had figured something out, the little guy grinned. Uncle, have you seen Hao before? Yes, when you were little, I even carried you. Guan Shilin said as they walked into the hall. Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu went to the main seats and sat down. Everyone else also sat down on the left and right. The servants walked back and forth, serving them tea and pastries before leaving. Yama Lord, Miss, Little Master. Elder Mei walked forward and bowed to them, but his eyes were fixed on Hao. Seeing him, Xianyuan Mose didn't say anything. He just picked up his tea and took a sip. Fengjiu pursed his lips and smiled. Hao looked at him strangely. When he saw his bald head, he seemed to have thought of something and the smile on his face disappeared. He sat quietly in Fengjiu's arms. Elder Mei, it's been 5 years. I thought you would leave. I didn't expect you to be waiting here. Fengjiu sighed softly and his eyes fell on Elder Mei. 5 years ago, she felt that his cultivation was unfathomable. 5 years later, his cultivation had stagnated. Now, they could see through other people's cultivation with just a glance. This kind of strength and cultivation was the result of their 5 years of cultivation. Elder Mei heard this and lowered his head. I've been waiting for Miss and Little Master to come back. Chapter 33-32. Her gaze fell on Du Fan's group. She saw that their cultivation levels had also increased. However, compared to Leng Hua's group, they could no longer compare. Thinking of how Leng Hua's group had been cultivating in Dan Wang Valley for the past few years, her gaze changed slightly. Looking at Du Fan's group, she said, "It's been hard on you these past few years." "Master, it's not been hard on us." Du Fan's group stood up and smiled as they spoke. Looking at Leng Hua's group, their eyes carried a trace of envy. It's just that 5 years have passed, and our strength is no longer as strong as Leng Hua's group. Originally, their strength was about the same. Now, Leng Hua's strength was greater than theirs. They had also stayed in Dan Wang Valley. Thinking about it, they had not been idle for a single moment over the past 5 years. Hearing this, Fengjiu smiled and said, "Take it slow. There's no need to rush. Your strength will not stop here." In the Foam Manor's main hall, everyone was chatting. It was at this time that the sun in the sky seemed to be covered by something. At the same time, a deep and powerful voice came from the sky. Xianyuan Mose. Fengjiu. It's been 5 years. I never thought that you would dare to return. The voice was like thunder as it spread through the sky above Four Corner City. Every word carried a powerful pressure, causing the citizens of Four Corner City below to cover their heads and hide in all directions. Because the voice in the sky was like thunder, all of Four Corner City was in a state of panic. Because the sun was covered by dark clouds, the sky became dark, causing people to feel fear. Oh no! It must be that Sovereign Tong Tian knows that Fengjiu's group has returned. I never thought that after 5 years, that Sovereign Tong Tian would still keep an eye on the Foam Manor. But why was there no movement when people moved in a while ago? Today, Fengjiu's group just came back, and he found out. I just knew it. Fengjiu's group offended that Sovereign Tong Tian. He definitely won't let the matter rest. Look. As soon as they returned, Sovereign Tong Tian immediately knew. 5 years ago, he let them escape. Today, 5 years later, he definitely won't give them another chance to escape. This time, it looks like Fengjiu and the others won't be able to escape. The people of the various families and forces in Four Corner City gathered their spirit power and set up a defensive barrier to block the pressure and ear-splitting sound coming from the sky. Their hearts were beating like drums. Regarding Fengjiu's return, Sifang City was helpless. If she had not returned, perhaps Sovereign Tong Tian would not have targeted them, and they would not have been affected. He was afraid that if they fought, they would bring disaster to the people of Four Corner City. At this time, almost at the same time that the voice in the sky spread, the people of the Blue Star Immortal Sect, which was not very far from Four Corner City, also knew that Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mose, who had disappeared for 5 years, had returned. However, what they did not expect was that the sovereign Tong Tian would find out about their return after being gone for 5 years. On one hand, they were worried about Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mose, and on the other hand, they were shocked by the sovereign Tong Tian's news. It seemed that the sovereign Tong Tian was very clear about the movements of the various large sections. However, he had not made a move. Perhaps it was because he did not put them in his eyes. Chapter 33-33. In other words, the sovereign of the sky-reaching sect had never taken them seriously. To be able to look down on them, it was obvious that he had the power to completely crush them. This knowledge caused their hearts to become abnormally heavy. Master and the others have returned. Within the sect, CK and Mu Xian quickly walked out of the cave and looked up at the sky covered by dark clouds. They were just discussing matters when they heard a voice come from the sky. That was the sovereign of the sky-reaching sect's voice. In other words, their master had returned. Let's quickly go to Four Corner City's Feng Manor to take a look. As CK spoke, she looked at Mu Xian. Let's go. Mu Xian replied. Her figure flashed and she was already moving forward. Seeing this, CK also quickly followed. The sovereign of the sky-reaching sect knew about their master's return. It could be seen that compared to the experts gathered in their sect, the sovereign of the sky-reaching sect viewed their master as a bigger thorn in his side. Who knew how strong they had become after not seeing them for 5 years? No matter what, they still had to quickly rush to Four Corner City to meet up with their master. At the same time, Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mose in the Feng Manor heard the voice coming from the sky. The two of them stood up and handed Hao over to Ling Shuang to take care of before walking out. Looking up at the sky, they saw that the sun was covered by dark clouds. The dark clouds in the sky stirred like an evil dragon swinging its tail, creating a terrifying whirlwind. As the dark clouds swirled, the faint sound of thunder could be heard. At the same time, because of the sovereign of the sky-reaching sect's voice and the pressure he released, a powerful and intimidating pressure descended on their manor like Mount Tai. It made them feel a sense of oppression and suffocation. Xianyuan Mose saw that the pressure from above was pressing down on their manor. At that moment, his hands formed a barrier in front of him. A powerful spiritual aura surged from his hands, and a visible spiritual aura rose up with a faint layer of green light. It formed a protective barrier that protected the Feng Manor within the barrier. At the same time, he called out in a low voice, "Green Dragon." The deep voice sounded as if it came from ancient times. A powerful pressure with a sharp aura soared into the sky. There was a flash of green light, followed by the roar of a dragon. Roar! The green dragon soared into the sky and opened its mouth, blowing away the dark clouds that were blocking the sun. With a wave of its tail, it slapped towards the wind and clouds. With a loud bang, the wind and clouds were blown away, disappearing into the air. The dark clouds in the sky dispersed and the fierce winds died down. It was as if Sovereign Tong Tian, who was hiding in the clouds above, had also calmed down for a while. There was no movement for a long while. Just when everyone below thought that the crisis was over, they heard Sovereign Tongtian's incredulous voice again. "You're already a godly king." In the sky, the sovereign of the sky-reaching sect had left a sliver of his divine sense hidden in the clouds. Because it was only a sliver of his divine sense, even if it was scattered, it wouldn't affect him. However, he never would have thought that Xianyuan Mose, who had just advanced 5 years ago, would actually break through and become a godly king. Chapter 33-34. Sovereign Tongtian's voice rang out from the sky, and it contained a powerful aura of spiritual energy. Therefore, when he spoke, it could be said that the entire Four-Corner City, and even the cultivators from the Blue Star Immortal sect, heard him. A godly king expert. These 4 words exploded in everyone's hearts like thunder. The cultivators who originally thought that even if Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu worked together, they would not be a match for Sovereign Tongtian felt their minds go blank when they heard these words. The shock in their hearts was like a waterfall crashing down from a high mountain, creating waves in their hearts and causing countless splashes. They were unable to calm down for a long time. In the Feng manner, Elder Mei could not help but widen his eyes in shock when he heard the words from above. That Yama Lord was already a godly king expert. Hiss! How was this possible? What had they done in the past 5 years to obtain such an inconceivable cultivation? In the sky, the black-robed Xianyuan Mose stood on the head of the azure dragon with his hands behind his back. He looked at the clouds with a deep gaze, and a deep voice rang out from his mouth with the pressure of a godly king expert. Both times we fought, you hid your head and showed your tail. Now that this sovereign is here, do you dare to come out and fight me? Hearing the challenge, everyone in Four-Corner City held their breaths. He actually issued a challenge to Sovereign Tongtian. Well, he was already in existence on the same level as Sovereign Tongtian. Why would he not dare to fight him? However, would Sovereign Tongtian accept his challenge? Would he dare to accept his challenge? It had to be said that at this moment, not only were the people in Four-Corner City nervous, but even the various experts who had gathered at the Blue Star Immortal sect felt their hearts thump loudly. They were so nervous that they could not breathe. If Sovereign Tongtian accepted Xianyuan Mose's challenge, it would mean that they had nothing to do. No matter who won or lost, after an intense battle, this place would be peaceful for a short period of time. However, now that Xianyuan Mose's strength was at the level of a divine king, would Sovereign Tongtian accept his challenge? The sky seemed to have quieted down for a moment. The atmosphere in the air became more and more gloomy, like the low pressure before a storm. That suffocating atmosphere was very frightening. Ha ha ha. Wild and wanton laughter came from the depths of the clouds. The sound shook the air, and even the ground shook slightly. How many years has it been since someone dared to speak to me like this? Just based on the fact that you, a brat who just entered the divine king level, dared to be this arrogant? Good. This monarch accepts your challenge. This monarch wants to see if you still have the guts to speak such arrogant words when you see this monarch's true body. The voice was gloomy and filled with hostility. His words were filled with viciousness. Clearly, although he was surprised that Xianyuan Mose had managed to break through to the divine king level in the past 5 years, he also felt that even though the other party was a divine king, he could not be mentioned in the same breath as him. Hence, at the moment when his authority was being challenged, he gloomily accepted Xianyuan Mose's challenge. Since he was looking forward to a battle with his true body, why not grant him his wish? Chapter 33-35. Hearing Xianyuan Mose's voice, the sovereign of Tongtian heavily harumphed from the depths of the clouds. Good. 1 month later. At the peak of Shao Mountain, this sovereign will take your head. His voice reverberated in the air until it disappeared completely. The pressure that the sovereign of Tongtian had released also disappeared after his divine sense disappeared. In the sky, Xianyuan Mose descended from the sky on an azure dragon and arrived above the Feng Manor. With a wave of his sleeve, the barrier protecting the Feng Manor was immediately removed. An azure light circled around the Feng Manor once before returning to Xianyuan Mose's body. At the same time, he arrived beside Fengjiu. Fengjiu held his hand and looked at Leng Hua and Du Fan. You two take care of the matters. He believed that it wouldn't be long before the Feng manor would be bustling with people again. Yes. The two of them responded and dismissed the crowd. At this time, Fengjiu, Xianyuan Mose and Guan Shilin were sitting in the hall. Just as they were talking, they heard that the Shao family had arrived. Because of CK and his relationship with the Shao family, Fengjiu thought for a bit, then waved his sleeve and took out a few spirit fruits from his space. Leng Hua. Master. Leng Hua walked in from outside. Take these spirit fruits and give them to the Shao family. Yes. Leng Hua replied and took the spirit fruits. He put them on a tray and walked outside. Du Fan and the Shao family's head were talking outside. After the Shao family's head handed over the things, he said, then I'll be going back first. If there's anything else you need, just let me know. Patriarch Shao, you're exaggerating. Du Fan smiled and said, let me send you off. As he spoke, he made a gesture of invitation. Leng Hua came from not far away. Seeing that Du Fan was going to send him out, he called out, Patriarch Shao, please wait. The two people in front stopped and looked back. When they saw that it was Leng Hua, Master Shao hurriedly bowed respectfully. Butler Leng. Shao family head, these are a few spirit fruits from my master. Leng Hua said with a smile. He handed the tray over and lifted the red cloth on it. Under the surprised gaze of the Shao family head, he said, this fruit is a longevity fruit. It blossoms every 500 years and bears fruit every 500 years. It can increase one's lifespan and cultivation. Hearing those words, the Shao family's master was pleasantly surprised. Of course, he had heard of the longevity fruit before. That fruit was extremely precious, and every single one of them was priceless. Yet, there were actually 4 of them on the tray, and they were even gifted to him. How could he not be pleasantly surprised? Thank you, Miss Feng. Thank you. He extended his trembling hands and received the fruits. He could not hide the excitement in his heart. This was not only because of the fruits. It was also because after all these years, he had finally made Fengjiu remember him and the Shao family. Send Master Shao off. Leng Hua said to Du Fan. After nodding at Master Shao, he turned around and left. Master Shao, please. Du Fan said with a smile. Yes, yes. He hurriedly and carefully put away the 4 fruits. Only then did he follow Du Fan out of the Feng manor and towards the Shao family. Not long after Master Shao left, 2 figures appeared in the sky. Not long after, they arrived outside the Feng manor's gates. Du Fan, who was about to turn around and leave, smiled when he saw the 2. Sovereign CK, Sovereign Mu Xian. We're here to see Master. The 2 looked at Du Fan and said. Chapter 33-36. In the hall, Guan Shilin looked at Xianyuan Mose and asked, you issued a challenge to the sovereign of the Skirich sect and agreed to meet at the peak of Mount E. How confident are you in defeating him? Just as the sovereign of the Skirich sect had said, Xianyuan Mose had just entered the Divine King realm, while the sovereign of the Skirich sect had advanced many years ago. Guan Shilin had to admit that he was a little worried about the 2 of them fighting. This was a battle to the death. The slightest carelessness could cost one's life. Xianyuan Mose lifted his teacup and took a sip of tea. He said unhurriedly in a low voice, 70%. Brother, don't worry. We'll have to face this battle sooner or later. Mose and I plan to prepare for our wedding once this matter is settled. Fengjiu's gaze fell on Xianyuan Mose as he spoke. She hadn't even made a move when the sovereign of the Skirich sect had appeared today because she believed that Mose's current cultivation level was enough for him to face the sovereign of the Skirich sect. Moreover, it had only been a wisp of the sovereign of the Skirich sect's consciousness that had appeared today. No one would dare to provoke them in the upcoming battle in a month's time. Master, Supremacy CK and the others are here. Lang Hua's voice rang out from outside the hall. Let them in. Feng Jiu said as he looked at the two people walking in. Greetings, masters. CK and Mu Xian bowed respectfully. Have a seat. Feng Jiu gestured. He looked at the two of them and asked, why are you here? We saw the sovereign of the Skirich sect and wanted to rush over to take a look, CK said as he looked at Xianyuan Mose and Feng Jiu. He asked, Master, are you all well? Feng Jiu smiled and said, if we weren't well, we wouldn't be sitting here to see you. CK smiled sheepishly when he heard this. He knew it was unnecessary to ask this question. Master Xianyuan and Sovereign of the Skirich sect are going to fight at the peak of Mount E. Do you need us to prepare anything? Mu Xian asked. Mount E had a steep terrain and its peak so high that it seemed to reach the clouds. He was a little surprised that they would choose such a place for the battle. The steeper the terrain, the more careful one had to be during a battle. I've heard that your sect has gathered cultivators from all over the world to fight against Sovereign of the sect. Xianyuan Moses' deep eyes as he asked, his dark eyes on Mu. Yes, this is the countermeasure that the suzerains of the other sects have discussed. The original plan of each sect was like this. Mu Xian simply told them about the plan of the other suzerains. Finally, he said, therefore, I asked Master, should we let them all cultivate in Mount G? To be to the Mount sect to the Mount sect. Of the other cultivators Mount of the sect, Inzas. Xianyuan Mose said slowly, when the God Kings fight, the pressure will spread and harm the weaker cultivators. If they want to go, they can only go to the foot of the mountain. Yes, I'll report this to the sect master and ask him to make the arrangements, Mu Xian replied. I haven't introduced you yet. This is my older brother, Guan Shilin. Feng Jiu looked at Guan Shilin and smiled, brother, these are my and Zay's disciples, CK and Mu Xian. Guan Shilin nodded. He had been looking at the two of them since he came here. He had heard about the two of them and felt that they were quite pleasing to the eye. Chapter 33-37. You don't have to be so courteous. Guan Shilin said with a smile, my sister is your master, but I'm not. You can just be friends with me. Hearing this, CK and Mu Xian looked at each other. They were just thinking about how they should address him. Now that he heard him say this, his heart relaxed. He cupped his hands and said, thank you for not abandoning us. Brother Guan, let's call each other brothers. Brother CK, Brother Mu. Guan Shilin cupped his hands in return and invited them to sit down. They chatted in the hall for a while. After a while, Lang Hua came in, Master, the kitchen has prepared some food and wine. Would you like to eat now? Okay. Feng Jiu nodded. CK and Mu Xian stood up and said, Master, we have to go back to the Shao family. Now that there's nothing else to do here, we'll take our leave. Don't you want to stay for dinner? Feng Jiu looked at them. No. They shook their heads. They knew that they had just come back and needed to gather, so they didn't want to disturb them. Let me see you out. Guan Shilin stood up and said to Feng Jiu and Xianyuan Mose, I'll see them out. With this, he gestured to CK and Mu Xian to leave. The two bowed slightly and walked out with Guan Shilin. On the way, the three chatted for a while. After they left, Guan Shilin turned around and walked in. Du Fan, tell the servants to put the food and wine in the shade under the tree over there. Guan Shilin pointed to a tree in the front yard and said with a smile, let's gather and eat something. Let them rest first. Okay. Du Fan responded and ordered the servants to prepare. Just as he was about to go to the kitchen to see how things were going, he saw a figure come in through the door. Old Jiang. Du Fan looked at him in surprise. He turned around and walked towards him. Why are you here? This old Jiang was the old man who had come to ask for the rank 6 origin-breaking pill. Back then, his master had him gather medicinal ingredients to exchange for a rank 6 pill. Later on, his master left, and this matter was left to him to handle. It was also because of this that when Elder Jiang gathered the medicinal ingredients and could not find anyone in the Feng manor, he, who had received the news, contacted him. Later on, after examining the medicinal ingredients, he gave him a rank 6 origin-breaking pill. Ever since that incident, he hadn't appeared in front of them for a long time. They didn't expect him to come today. He probably heard the news of Master's return, so he came to take a look. Manager Du, when Elder Jiang saw him, he hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed, saying, "I heard that the ghost doctor has returned, so I came specially to thank her." As he spoke, he added, "I have been traveling outside recently and obtained a precious spirit medicine, so I wanted to give it to the ghost doctor." Hearing this, Du Fan smiled and said, "Since it's like this, then please come in." He gestured for him to come in and brought him to the front yard. Feng Jiu, Xianyuan Mose, and Guan Shilin were sitting under a tree in the yard. Leng Shuang brought Hao over. Qin Xian was also waiting on the side. "Master, Elder Jiang said he wanted to personally come and thank you, so I invited him in." Du Fan said with a smile and turned his head slightly to look at Elder Jiang. Chapter 33-38. Seeing him, Feng Jiu didn't immediately recall who he was. It wasn't until he said those words that she remembered that he was the person who had asked for the Dan back then. Her gaze swept over him, and she smiled. "That 6th level Dan of the origin was exchanged with your spiritual medicine, there's no need to thank me. It's just an equal exchange." No, it was because of the ghost doctor's Dan that changed me. If it wasn't for that Dan back then, I wouldn't be alive to see the ghost doctor right now. As he spoke, he took out an item from his space and handed it to Du Fan, saying, "I know that the ghost doctor likes rare and precious spiritual medicines. I obtained this when I was traveling outside, please accept it." Du Fan placed the item on the table, and retreated to the side. Feng Jiu raised her eyebrows after hearing this, but didn't open the jade box. Instead, she looked at Elder Jiang and said, "The Dan back then was exchanged with your spiritual medicine, if I accept your spiritual medicine now, it's a little. The ghost doctor's kindness in saving my life, how could it be repaid with a mere spiritual medicine on a list? I ask the ghost doctor to accept this spiritual medicine. I'm someone who doesn't understand alchemy, this spiritual medicine would be a waste if left with me. Only the ghost doctor can make use of its full potential." As he spoke, he bowed towards them, saying, "I came today to personally thank the ghost doctor, I'll take my leave first." As he spoke, he didn't wait for Feng Jiu to say anything, and hurriedly left, as if he was afraid that she wouldn't accept the spiritual medicine. Seeing him leave in a hurry, Feng Jiu couldn't help but smile. She opened the jade box, saying, "What kind of spiritual medicine is it?" When she saw the spiritual medicine inside the jade box, her eyes couldn't help but shrink. "It's actually a life-saving immortal herb." Guan Shilin took a look, and asked in astonishment, "Life-saving immortal herb? Used to save lives?" He didn't understand spiritual medicine, and didn't know what it was used for. Feng Jiu smiled and picked up the life-saving immortal herb from the box. This is indeed a life-saving immortal herb. It's very precious and can only be found by chance. What was even rarer was that due to the maintenance of the jade box, this life-saving immortal herb was still verdant and green. There was even a small lump of black soil wrapped around its roots. In other words, she could plant this spiritual herb in her space and in the future, it would be able to display its greatest medicinal effects. With a turn of her hand, she planted the immortal herb into the medicinal field in her spatial space. Then, she put away the jade box, and said, "This Elder Jiang has given me something good. That old man was right. No matter how precious an elixir is, only in your hands will it be able to unleash its full potential." Guan Shilin said with a smile. He poured them a glass of wine and said to Qin Xian, "Go and ask the kitchen staff to serve the dishes first." "Yes." Qin Xian responded and turned to leave. "Mother." Hao came to Fengjiu's side and leaned into his mother's embrace. "Hao, have a good rest today. Mother will take you out to play tomorrow." She picked him up and let him sit on her lap. Xianyuan Mose glanced at them, then looked at Hao and said, "Hao, you're a boy and you're already so big. How can you let your mother carry you all the time? Sit by yourself." Chapter 33-39. Fengjiu glanced at Xianyuan Mose. She felt that he was too strict with Hao. He was just a child. It was nothing. However, since he had already said so, she didn't say anything more. She just smiled and carried Hao to a chair at the side. "Then Hao will sit here. Mother will help you get some food later." When Hao heard this, he immediately smiled happily. Yes. Hao will help mother get some food too. Hao is so obedient. Fengjiu touched his delicate little face and praised. Not far away, Elder Mei, who was helping to bring the dishes over, saw this scene and felt a little sour in his heart. The little master grew up by the side of the ghost doctor and Yama Lord and was as close as a family to them. He wondered if he would be unwilling to be close to his biological parents in the future when he met them. He had already sent a message to his master. He wondered when they would come down to take a look. Thinking of this, he put away his thoughts and walked forward with a smile. "The dishes are here, the dishes are here. They're piping hot. They've just been prepared." He placed the dishes on the table. The servants also brought the dishes over. Not long after, the table in the courtyard was filled with dishes and wine. Everyone also sat down. "This toast is to everyone." Fengjiu held the wine cup and gestured to everyone. She drank it in one gulp. Everyone also stood up and raised their cups to return the toast. As they drank, everyone started chatting. They all talked about what happened in the past 5 years. There were fewer people sitting at Fengjiu's table. At this moment, Hao was picking up a piece of meat and putting it in Fengjiu's bowl. "Mother, eat. Hao is so obedient." Fengjiu smiled and patted his head. She also picked up a piece of meat for him and said, "Hao, eat more so that your body will grow." Yes. Hao replied. He took 2 mouthfuls of food and looked at Xianyuan Mose and Guan Shilin. Thus, the little guy also picked up some food for them. "Father, eat. Uncle, meat." Xianyuan Mose saw him reach his hand over, so he picked up the bowl and took the food. Only then did he say, "Sit down and eat." "Little Hao, you're much more obedient than the little rascal at Uncle's house," Guan Shilin said with a smile. He picked up his bowl and took the food that Hao put in his bowl. At the same time, he also gave him a drumstick. Hearing this, Hao blinked. Uncle has a rascal in his family? Fengjiu also looked at him and asked with a smile, "Brother, I haven't asked you yet. How many children do you have now?" He and Yi Jing had been married for several years. If they had 1 child each year, looking at Fengjiu's expression, Guan Shilin knew what she was thinking. He coughed lightly and said with a smile, "Look at what you're asking. What do you mean by how many children we have now? Your sister-in-law and I only have 1 son now. He's only 4 years old and he's always so naughty." Fengjiu could not help but laugh. "Only 1? I thought you would have 2 or 3. We were thinking of waiting for the child to grow up and have another one. We can't take care of 1. Guan Shilin grinned. Thinking of his wife and son at home, the happy smile on his face naturally overflowed. Xianyuan Mose, who was listening at the side, had a slightly deep look in his eyes. Especially when Fengjiu said that he thought Guan Shilin would have 2 or 3 children, he could not help but think, when he and Audiobook get married in the future, would they have 2 children in 3 years? Or 3 in 4 years? Or would they only have 1 child and wait for the child to grow up? Chapter 3340. As Fengjiu and Guan Shilin spoke, they seemed to have thought of something. Suddenly, they looked at Xianyuanmo's and asked, "When we get married, will we get married here? Or will we go back?" Hearing this, Xianyuanmo smiled and said, "Do you want to go back or do you want to do it here? What did you originally plan to do?" Fengjiu looked at him and asked. "I originally wanted to hold a grand wedding here and bring my parents and relatives over. However, we can also go back to the Phoenix dynasty. You can also get married from home. It depends on what you like." As Xianyuanmo spoke, he thought to himself that when they got married, there were still many things that needed to be taken care of. Even after the battle with the sovereign of Tongtian was over, there were still many things that needed to be taken care of. Especially since he had to personally prepare the betrothal gifts for her. He wanted the wedding to be grand, so there were even more things that needed to be prepared. As for where they would get married, he felt that the most important thing was still her decision. Hearing this, Fengjiu's heart warmed. She smiled until her eyes narrowed and her face was filled with joy. It's too far to bring them over. Also, they're already used to a peaceful life. Rather than rushing all the way, why don't we go back and get married? I'll get married from home. That's even better. After all, that was where she grew up. Getting married from the Phoenix dynasty's Feng Manor was the most suitable place. Hearing this, Xianyuanmo nodded, "All right, we'll do as you say. After the battle at Shao Mountain is over, we'll have someone pick an auspicious day." She replied with a smile. Come. Let's eat." Guan Shilin laughed loudly. Thinking that they were finally going to pick a day to get married, he was very happy. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, he ordered the servants in the manor to pack their things. Aside from Du Fan and the others, Fengjiu and the others went to rest first, the next morning, in the Feng Manor. Hao blinked and looked at the tattered beggar's clothes. He tilted his head and asked his mother, "Mother, why do we have to dress like this when we go out to play?" Because his mother promised him yesterday that she would take him out to play today, he got up early and picked out his favorite set of clothes. However, when he arrived at his mother's place, the clean clothes on his body were taken off and changed into the ragged clothes of a beggar that had been washed until it was white. He was only 5 or 6 years old, so he couldn't help but wonder. Did Dan Wang have to dress like this when he went shopping outside the valley? Fengjiu helped him put on his clothes and messed up his neatly combed hair. Then, he put on some simple makeup on his fair and delicate face. His fair skin became dark, and the simple makeup made it impossible to see his original appearance. That's about it. Fengjiu nodded with satisfaction. "Mother, how do I go shopping like this?" Hao blinked and looked at her in confusion. Fengjiu's lips curled into a smile as she said, "Mother will take you shopping and out to play. We're not going to sit in a spirit deer carriage and go out dressed to the nines." She reached out and gently flicked his forehead as she said, "You're new to the world. Mother will teach you how to see the world." Hao didn't really understand, but he knew that his mother wouldn't harm him. Thus, he listened to her and did as she said. Pfft. Chapter 3341. Xiaojiu, why did you make Hao look like a little beggar? You're not thinking of letting him go out like this, are you? Guan Shilin walked in, took a chair, and sat at the side. Seeing Hao's confused look, he couldn't help but shake his head inwardly. Although Hao was smart, a 5 or 6-year-old child like him probably wouldn't be able to take it after a while. "Uncle," Hao called out and then looked at his mother. Fengjiu patted Hao's messy hair, smiled, and said to Guan Shilin, "Only by letting him be at the lowest level can he see things that those at the top can't. Training has to start from a young age." Hao has been with us for all these years, and Zhe Ku and I have not spoiled him. I think he should get used to it very quickly. As she spoke, she squatted down and looked at Hao, saying, Hao, mother wants to see if you can survive by yourself when you're alone. So, I'll give you 10 days. In these 10 days, you can't use anything in your space. The only thing you can use is the dagger tied to your calf. You have to find a way to survive without anything. You have to learn how to resolve crises by yourself. You have to find food to fill your stomach. But remember one thing, if you have good intentions, you can't do evil. In these 10 days, you have to live by yourself in Sifang City. You can't tell anyone that you're my son. You can only exist as a little beggar. You can only come home after 10 days. Can you do it? Fengjiu looked at the stunned Hao and asked softly. Hearing her words, Hao thought for a moment and nodded, yes, Hao can do it. He thought that 10 days should not be difficult. It could only be said that the little guy had never tried living alone and thought too simply of things. Okay, then mother will have someone send you out. She touched his head and smiled, then called out to the outside, Leng Hua. Master. Leng Hua walked in from outside. Send Hao out of the residence, find a place to put him down, and come back. Fengjiu ordered. Yes. Leng Hua responded. He went forward to pick up Hao and walked out. At this moment, Hao who was being carried, seemed to have just regained his senses. He couldn't help but ask, Mother, what if Hao misses you? Fengjiu smiles faintly, then just keep it in your heart. When you come back, mother will prepare something delicious for you. All right. He replied with a smile and allowed Leng Hua to carry him away, silently leaving the Feng manor. Guan Shilin was stunned as he watched the child being sent out of the residence. He said, Xiaojiu, are you really not worried about letting a child like him stay outside for 10 days? Nothing will happen, right? Fengjiu walked out and stood in the courtyard, saying, I already had Luo Yu secretly follow him. In these 10 days, with him watching over him, nothing will happen. As she spoke, she sighed, Brother, Hao's background is not simple. The dangers he will face in the future will not be any less than if he were by our side. There will come a day when he will return to his birth parents' side. If we let him go back, we won't be by his side to protect him. We can only teach him how to recognize people and adapt accordingly. Only like this can he survive the dangers in the future. Chapter 33-42. Brother, I haven't sparred with you in a long time. Let's go to the back of the mountain, shall we? Fengjiu said with a smile. Sparring with you? Guan Shilin shook his head and said with a smile, You are now a godly king expert. Wouldn't I be looking for trouble if I fought with you? No. I originally wanted to accompany you out for a walk. Since you've sent Hao out, I'll go find Du Fan and the others to spar with. As he spoke, he walked out. If you want to spar, go spar with Moze. You'll be evenly matched if you two spar. Seeing Guan Shilin leave the courtyard in the blink of an eye, Fengjiu couldn't help but shake her head and laugh. Really, even if it's just sparring, I won't go all out. As she spoke, she walked out, planning to talk to Elder Mei about Hao. On the other side, in an alley in Four Corner City, Leng Hua put Hao down and said, I'll leave you here. Your mother wants you to train in Four Corner City. For the next 10 days, you'll stay in this city. As for where you stay, that's up to you. Leng Hua looked at Hao who was blinking at him. He paused for a moment, then took out 2 steamed buns wrapped in paper from his space and put them in his hands. He said gently, You haven't eaten anything this morning, right? Have a steamed bun to fill your stomach first. As for your next meal, you'll have to figure it out yourself. Thank you, Uncle Hua. He took the steamed bun and thanked him. Then I'll go now. Be careful and don't trust strangers so easily. Leng Hua patted his head and left in a flash. After he left, he was the only one left in the alley with 2 steamed buns. He thought for a moment, then walked to the side and sat down. He picked up one of the steamed buns and ate it, then put the other one away and stuffed it into his clothes. He ate the steamed buns without water or porridge. This made it difficult for him, who was used to eating good food, to swallow. The more he ate, the slower he became. In the end, he took the remaining half of the steamed bun and walked out of the alley. Steamed buns. Freshly baked steamed meat buns. Hao Er's eyes lit up when he heard the hawker's voice. Meat bun. Meat buns were much more delicious than steamed buns. There was meat inside the meat buns. Unknowingly, he walked with his short legs to the stall selling meat buns. Looking at the steaming meat buns on the rack, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He had just come out, so why did the meat buns smell so fragrant? Could it be that the things outside the mansion were more fragrant? Go go go. Where did this little beggar come from? Go, go, go. Don't get in the way of my business this early in the morning. When the peddler saw a dirty little beggar standing in front of him, he immediately came forward to chase him away. Hao Er was pushed to the side by him. He stood in the corner and watched. He saw the fierce-looking hawker greet the customers who came forward to buy buns with a smile in the blink of an eye. Although he was young, he was smart. Moreover, he had learned a lot from Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mo's. When he saw the difference in treatment between the hawker's front and back, he instantly understood the crux of the matter. He was a little beggar. He couldn't afford to buy the meat buns, so there was no profit for the hawker. Therefore, he treated them with a nasty face. The hawker greeted the customers with a smile because they bought his buns and he could make money. That was why he was so polite to them. Chapter 33-43. Would it be fine as long as he didn't starve and could survive for the next 10 days? If that was the case, it shouldn't be difficult, right? After thinking about it, he walked along the main street. After living in the valley for a few years, it was his first time walking the main street in the city. Everywhere looked new and interesting. However, as soon as he approached the places where people were doing business, he was chased away. Perhaps it was because he was young, a little beggar, and a little beggar who wandered around the city alone. Therefore, 2 men in the streets and alleys of the city had their eyes on him. Seeing the little beggar walk past in front of them, the 2 men signaled with their eyes and quietly followed him. Hao Er, who was still looking at the interesting things on the main street, didn't know that he was being watched until he came to a corner and a man came forward to stop him. Little brother, why are you alone? Hao Er stopped and looked at the shifty-looking man in front of him. He couldn't help but frown. Get out of my way. He didn't know him. Little brother, you haven't eaten yet, right? Look, I have a roasted chicken leg. Here, eat it. The man took out a chicken leg wrapped in oil paper and handed it to him. Although he hadn't eaten anything else in the morning and his stomach was growling when he smelled the aroma of the chicken leg, he still shook his head. No need, I've eaten. His mother said that one who was unaccountably solicitous was hiding evil intentions. This person must be a bad person. Instinctively, he stared at him defensively and even took a step back. However, who knew that a gunny sack would suddenly be put over him? Then, he only felt a pain in his neck and lost consciousness. Go, go, go. The 2 men saw that there was no one around the corner and immediately carried him away. A child in a gunny sack who was unconscious and motionless naturally wouldn't attract the attention of others. Even if they did, they would only think that they were carrying goods. However, Luo Yu, who was watching from the dark, saw this and a chill flashed through his eyes. He quietly followed them and wanted to see how Hao would deal with it. After all, his master had instructed him not to make a move unless it was absolutely necessary, and to let him try to solve it himself. At this time, Wanyan Qianhua had just arrived at Four Corner City. She, who was in the sect, had heard that Fengjiu and the others had returned. She should have come yesterday, but she was delayed by some matters, so she came early this morning. Walking along the main street of the city, she suddenly smelled the fragrance of braised meat. She wanted to buy some braised meat and go to the Feng Manor to find Fengjiu to drink some wine. Thus, she turned around and went in the direction of the fragrance. Putting away the braised meat she had bought into her space, she prepared to go to the Feng Manor. However, she saw a figure that could not be considered unfamiliar silently pass by. It did not startle the people on the street in the slightest. Isn't that Xiaojiu's man? Who is he following? Wanyan Qianhua murmured softly and followed him to take a look. Luo Yu followed the two men to the slums. He concealed his aura and hid in a big tree as he watched the two men bring Hao into a dilapidated house. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something. A fierce look flashed across his eyes as he instantly attacked behind him. Wanyan Qianhua was startled and instinctively raised her hand to block his attack. At the same time, she said, "It's me, Wanyan Qianhua." When he saw the person in front of him, Luo Yu stopped his attack. He was startled and asked, "Young Miss Wanyan. Why is it you? Why are you here?" Chapter 33-44. Seeing that it was her, Luo Yu relaxed and said, "I was ordered by master to secretly guard little master." He briefly told her about what his master had told him. Finally, he said, "Because the young master was captured by two men in a sack and brought here, I followed him. I didn't expect to be noticed by Miss Wanyan. With his current cultivation, ordinary people wouldn't be able to discover him." However, when he looked at Wanyan Qianhua in front of him and thought of the rumors about her in the past 5 years, he felt relieved. Her cultivation wasn't considered weak, so it was normal for her to be stronger than him now. Hearing Luo Yu's words, Wanyan Qianhua chuckled. "Your master is really different from ordinary people. That child is only 5 or 6 years old, yet she is willing to let him out to suffer. Master is doing it for little master's sake." As Luo Yu spoke, his gaze shifted from her to the house in front of them. Because the house here was more dilapidated and he was standing on a high tree, he could see the scene in the house's courtyard. He stood guard here. Seeing that Wanyan Qianhua didn't leave, he couldn't help but ask, "Miss Wanyan, are you going to the residence?" "It's fine. It won't be too late to go after I see what a Zhu's child is like." She found a place to sit down, her red dress hidden among the lush leaves. Hearing her words, Luo Yu didn't speak again. Instead, he looked at the scene in the courtyard in front of them. In the dilapidated courtyard, a man put the gunny sack on the ground. Another man beside him shouted, "Hurry up and let the little demon out, lest he suffocates to death." "Don't worry, he won't suffocate to death. This gunny sack can ventilate," the other man said disapprovingly. After catching his breath, he bent down to untie the gunny sack and dragged the child out. "This brat is still unconscious." The man kicked Hao with his foot. "Bring him inside first. We'll talk when he wakes up." As the other man spoke, he picked Hao up from the ground and walked inside. Hao felt like he was thrown onto a hard bed. He didn't open his eyes and maintained his calm breathing. He listened to their conversation as they closed the door. When the room was quiet, he opened his eyes and sat up. He was captured by bad people. He blinked his eyes and pursed his lips. He wasn't worried about his situation. Instead, he was worried that if his mother and father knew that he was captured by bad people, would they be disappointed in him? Thinking of this, he started to think about it. He looked around the room. He was looking for an escape route. He estimated the strength of the two people and his chances of escaping. Escape? Could he escape? His mother had told him that he had to think twice when encountering problems. Running away was the last resort. He should not think about running away unless it was absolutely necessary. He had to learn how to solve problems. His parents had taught him a lot of things, and with his cultivation, he reckoned that as long as he was careful and not careless, he would be able to deal with those two bad guys. But, he'll just wait and see. Why did they capture him and bring him here? Were they going to sell him? Thinking of this, he lay on the bed and continued to pretend to be unconscious while listening to the sounds outside. After a long time, the sounds outside gradually became lively, and from the sound of it, it seemed to be the voices of some children. Chapter 33:45. Brat. That kick wasn't light, and it hurt so much that he opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, he was lifted up and dragged outside. He patted that person's hand with a panicked look. "What are you doing? Let me go." "Tsk. Brat, you'd better be obedient since you're in our hands. Otherwise, I'll break your legs." That man swung his hand and threw Hao-er to the ground. Only then did Hao-er see that there were 11 little beggars standing in this shabby little courtyard. Some looked 1 or 2 years older than him, and some looked even younger than him. They were all wearing tattered clothes and had messy hair. They were all thin and dry as if they could not eat their fill. At this moment, these little beggars looked at him and then curled up into a ball to look at the two men. There was a trace of cowardice and fear between their brows. Hao-er, who was sitting on the ground, glanced at those beggars and then looked at the two men. "Why did you capture me?" He was young and had never experienced such things. He did not know why these two men had captured him and gathered him together with these beggars. He originally thought that they wanted to sell him, but it did not seem like it. The two men glanced at him and then looked at the beggars. "Where's the money you begged today? Take it out." As he spoke, a whip appeared in his hand. Looking at that whip, fear appeared in the eyes of those little beggars. They hurriedly took out all the money in their bags. Some even took out a steamed bun that they begged for and placed it in front of them. Hao-er looked on in confusion. Suddenly, he saw that the man with the whip suddenly whipped the youngest beggar fiercely. He scolded fiercely, "You're the least again. I think you don't want to live anymore." Whoosh! Slap! Wah! Pain, pain! Woo! Woo woo, don't hit me, don't hit me! That little beggar curled up into a ball and cried. From the sound of it, it was a girl. However, that man did not stop because the little beggar was a girl, nor did he show mercy because the little girl looked to be 5 or 6 years old. On the contrary, every lash of the whip carried a hidden force. It whooshed out and landed on the little girl's curled-up body. Every lash of the whip tore open the little girl's skin and flesh. Hao-er was stunned by the scene in front of him. He stared at the scene with his eyes wide open. It was only when he saw that the little girl had fallen did he suddenly recover. "Stop it! Stop it!" He shouted angrily, and without a second thought, he rushed forward and stood in front of the little girl. Her hands were tightly clenched into fists in anger, and they were trembling slightly. Her little face, which couldn't be seen clearly, was tense, and her eyes were fixed on the man. Her anger was obvious. "Ha! This little brat dares to stand up. I wanted to teach you a lesson later, but it looks like you're itching for a beating." The man looked at the little beggar who rushed forward and could not help but laugh coldly. He was just a little brat. He could not even protect himself when he did not understand the situation. How could he protect others? It was a good opportunity to teach him a lesson and make him obedient. Chapter 33:46. On a tree not far away, Luo Yu's eyes were full of murderous intent as he watched the scene in the courtyard. He resisted the urge to attack. At this moment, Wanyan Qianhua's voice came from behind. "What's the hurry? Keep watching. This kid is not a weakling." Wanyan Qianhua said as she supported her chin with one hand and watched the scene in the courtyard. Her beautiful eyes flashed slightly, and no one knew what she was thinking. She looked at Hao with some admiration. Of course, Luo Yu was anxious. That was Hao His master and the Yama Lord had never hit him. If he was whipped by these two people, how could he go back and face his master? However, in the next moment, his anxious and worried expression was replaced by astonishment. Hao gritted his teeth and looked angrily at the man who was whipping him. The anger in his heart reached the extreme, so much so that in the next moment, the spiritual aura hidden in his body surged. The small figure carried a surge of spiritual aura and fiercely slammed into the man. Even though he was small, the impact was not light. Ah! The man who whipped out the whip was shocked and his whole body was sent flying. However, in the next moment, his whip was also snatched away. Then, a whip containing spiritual aura landed on his body with a snap. Hiss! Ah! Little brat, you're courting death. The man sucked in a breath of cold air and cursed. His body fell to the ground with a loud bang because of the impact and the whip. The other man standing at the side was stunned. When he came back to his senses, he strode forward and waved his hand to slap Hao. Brat! You've got guts. My parents couldn't bear to hit me, but you dare to kick me. Hao's childish voice was filled with coldness and anger. He no longer hid his strength and directly whipped the two of them. Who asked you to kick me? Who asked you to be the bad guys? Whoosh! Whoosh! Pa pa! Ah! Every time the whip fell, the two men's flesh would split open and they would scream in pain. The two men tried to resist, but in the end, they couldn't even find a chance to fight back. They had no choice but to scream and beg for mercy. Don't hit us, we know we were wrong. The two of them curled up and begged for mercy. At the same time, they secretly glanced at the child holding the whip. Their hearts were filled with shock. They did not expect that this inconspicuous little brat was already a cultivator. Moreover, he was an immortal cultivator who could hide his cultivation level. This child must have some treasures on him. Thinking of this, the two of them cried and begged, we really know that we were wrong. We won't dare to do it again. Really, we will let those little beggars go. We won't do this again. Hao looked at the wounds on their bodies and begged and cried as he spoke. For a moment, he could not make up his mind. He thought for a moment and did not continue to hit them. Instead, he used his childish voice to threaten them, if you continue to be bad guys, I will definitely not let you off. No, we will definitely not be bad guys again. The two of them looked at each other and hurriedly said. Seeing this, Hao turned to look at the little beggar who was curled up in a ball. He walked forward and was about to see how she was doing when the two men behind him took out their knives and fiercely slashed at the little brat whose back was facing them. Chapter 33:47. The two swords reflected the cold light of the sun as they slashed at him. It was a feeling of approaching death, and it made his hair stand on end. He had been trained by his parents for many years, so in this dangerous moment, his body reacted faster than his brain. The spiritual power in his body surged in an instant, and he squatted down at the same time. He reached into his calf with one hand and pulled out the dagger hidden there. Then, he stabbed the dagger from top to bottom into the feet of the two men. The dagger pierced through the man's boots and into his flesh. It seemed that it had even broken the bones of his feet. Hao's figure had already dashed past the two men at the same time. He was not even at the man's waist when he suddenly jumped up and sat on the man's shoulder. He covered the man's eyes with one hand and slit the man's neck with the other hand holding the dagger. I'll kill you. The other man saw that the man had died with his eyes wide open and slashed at Hao. However, Hao nimbly dodged and stabbed the man's waist with the dagger in his hand. Hiss! The man let out a blood-curdling scream. Due to the injury on his waist, he instinctively bent down. But at this moment, a cold gleam of light flashed in front of his eyes, and he saw a dagger piercing his heart. The man let out a muffled groan as his eyes stared fixedly at the brat in front of him. Even at the moment of his death, he still did not understand how they had fallen into this brat's hands. When Hao-er pulled out the dagger, a column of blood splashed out and sprayed Hao-er's face. He stared blankly at his own hand that was holding the dagger, and at the person who had fallen in front of him. He killed someone. He actually killed someone. For a moment, fear, panic, and helplessness surged in his heart. He did not want to kill anyone, and he had never killed anyone before. He only reacted instinctively when danger came. Those attacks and those moves were all taught by his mother. However, before he even realized it, he had already killed those two people. He stood there in a daze and stared blankly at the two corpses on the ground. He had thought that after beating them up, he would let them go as long as they did not do bad things again. He did not want to kill them, but they wanted to kill him. In his mind, he remembered what his mother had taught him. His mother had said, "Some people should not be merciful when they deserve to be killed. Don't give them a chance to kill you. Be decisive and cut off all future troubles." He thought that his mother was right. He had not done this properly. He had been careless. If not for his body's instinctive reaction, he would have been the one dead. Thinking of this, he gradually calmed down. Looking at the two corpses, he was no longer afraid. He walked forward and took all the valuables from their bodies. His mother had said that this was a spoil of war. This was his spoil of war. After stuffing the things into his clothes, he quickly walked to the little beggar's side. However, when he wanted to help her up, the little beggar shrank back and kept retreating, looking at him with a face full of fear. Hao-er was stunned when he saw the fear in her eyes. He had saved her. Why was she afraid of him? He was young and did not understand. Hence, he thought for a moment and said, "They are dead. They will not hit you again." Chapter 33-48. The human heart was the most difficult thing in the world to understand. Even an old monster that had lived for hundreds of years might not be able to see through it, much less Hao-er, who was only 5 or 6 years old. At such a young age, he pursed his lips and silently glanced at the beggars. With a dark expression, he said to them, "Go dig 2 holes in the back and bury them." Seeing that they were all standing there without moving, he naturally copied his father and put his hands behind his back. Pretending to be a little adult, he coldly shouted, "What are you still standing there for? Didn't you hear what I said?" Being shouted at like this and thinking about how this child who was even shorter than them had just killed the 2 men in front of them, they were shocked and instinctively replied, "Yes, yes." They quickly went forward and hurriedly dragged the 2 corpses to the back. They then began to dig 2 deep holes and buried the 2 men. Not far away, Wanyan Qianhua gently laughed, "This kid's aura is 70% like Emoze's. I estimate that if this continues, he will be the next king of hell when he grows up." At this moment, Luo Yu was grinning. His original worries were finally put to rest. Sure enough, Hao-er did not disappoint his master and the Yama Lord. If his master knew, he would definitely be very happy, right? "Young Miss Wanyan, it's already getting late." Luo Yu looked at her with a smile. Wanyan Qianhua glanced at him and said with a smile, "Enough. Even if you don't chase me away, I will leave. I have no interest in staying here all night." As Wanyan Qianhua spoke, she waved her sleeve. In the next moment, her figure flashed and she headed in the direction of the foam manor. Watching her leave, Luo Yu smiled. He knew that there was no need for him to say anything. Wanyan Qianhua would tell his master about what she had seen. Thinking of this, his mood improved. He could not help but hum a little tune as he sat in the tree and kept watch. Those 2 people were already dead. What happened next would depend on what Hao-er did. Night fell. In the shabby room, Hao looked at the beggars and thought for a bit before asking, "Do you have a home?" The beggars looked at each other and shook their heads. "We are all orphans." If they had a home, they would not have been caught by those two people to help them earn money. Hearing them say that they were orphans, Hao's small brow furrowed. "Those two people are dead. You can go wherever you want. But we don't know where to go. Also, we will starve to death." The younger beggars said this. Hearing this, Hao thought, "Hao's right." The little beggars listened to him and didn't say anything. They just lowered their heads slightly. The youngest girl among them looked up at Hao timidly and asked, Then will you hit us?" As Hao spoke, he thought for a bit then added, "But you must all listen to me. As long as you are obedient, I will guarantee that you will have food to eat." "Okay." Everyone agreed. Just like that, the matter was settled. Chapter 33-49. Hearing Wanyan Qianhua tell her about Hao's situation outside today, Fengjiu smiled. "That's good too. This child has been living in seclusion with us and has almost never come into contact with the outside world. I just want him to see the outside world. He will only understand if he experiences it himself. He is young, but I don't think you need to worry. That child is smart." Wanyan Qianhua played with her hair and leaned lazily on the table. "Sister, you don't know. Hao might leave us soon." Fengjiu sighed softly when she mentioned this. Her voice was filled with reluctance. Wanyan Qianhua raised her voice with a hint of charm. "What's going on? Hao's biological parents are still here. If I'm not wrong, they will come to take him back soon." She poured a cup of wine and took a sip. "You can bear to return him to them?" Wanyan Qianhua glanced at her and said, "So what if they are his biological parents? Didn't you pick him up because he was thrown away? Now that he is so big, you want to take him back when he is white and fat?" Fengjiu shook her head and sighed softly. "So what if I can't bear to? His biological parents are still here, and it is said that they were forced to do so. Now that they have found him, I can't force him to stay." "Who are his parents? How do you know he is here?" Wanyan Qianhua asked. Fengjiu looked at her and said slowly, "Xuanwu immortal." "Xuanwu immortal?" Wanyan Qianhua was stunned. She, who was leaning on the table as if she had no bones, couldn't help but sit up straight when she heard these words. She said with a serious expression, "You are saying that your son is Xuanwu immortal's son?" "Yes." Fengjiu replied, "Isn't there a bald old man in my residence? His name is Elder Mei, and he came here for Hao. He's been here for 5 years, and he's been with Du Fan and the others for the past 5 years. Now that we're back and Hao has grown up, his biological parents will naturally come to visit soon." TSK, I didn't expect this." Wanyan Qianhua's eyes lit up. He smiled and said, "Your son is also a person with heaven-defying luck. You said that you saved him when his life was hanging by a thread. After you brought him back, you took him as your son and raised him by your side for 5 or 6 years. It's already amazing that he's your son. I didn't expect him to be the son of Xuanwu immortal. Status doesn't bring any benefits." Fengjiu sighed and said, "If he was an ordinary child, he wouldn't have learned those things so early. However, his status forced him to adapt and learn those things." Hearing this, Wanyan Qianhua seemed to have sensed something. The smile on her face disappeared. No one knew what she thought of, but she said slowly, "Yes. Sometimes, a good family background isn't a good thing. Only people like them knew that a good background and a good identity often meant that the responsibility on their shoulders was heavier. The things they had to learn and the things they had to bear were also more than ordinary people." The two drank quietly. No one in the courtyard disturbed them. After a while, Fengjiu looked at her and asked, "Sister, how are you in Zhenjiashang? Chapter 3350. Hearing this, Wanyan Qianhua's eyes flashed. She poured another cup of wine and said, "We had nothing to do with each other 5 years ago." Then she chuckled and said, "Ha! You should be saying that we never had anything to do with each other. That person never wanted to have anything to do with her. She was the only one who was stubborn." Hearing this and looking at her expression, Fengjiu was slightly surprised. In her opinion, although her sister said that they had nothing to do with each other, it didn't seem to be the case. Back then, when she first met her elder sister, she admired her from the bottom of her heart. She was so similar to her elder sister, so she naturally knew that her elder sister's standards were not low. Otherwise, she would not have been single for so many years. But she didn't expect that when she came to the upper world from the lower world, she met someone who moved her heart. She actually abandoned her pride to pursue love. What she didn't expect was that the person she fell in love with was the leader of the Xiaoyao school. It was said that the leader of the Xiaoyao school was hundreds of years old, Jun Ju Shang. Although age was not the focus of attention in the cultivation world, and there were many experts or big clans who had young and beautiful female cultivators by their side, she did not expect that her elder sister would fall in love with a man who was already hundreds of years old. When she heard her sister mention Jun Ju Shang, she wanted to meet him. She was curious from the bottom of her heart. A man who could move her sister, how outstanding would he be? She drank wine and thought about this. Seeing her sister finish one cup of wine after another, she couldn't help but chuckle and say, "Sister, it's easy to get drunk drinking like this." "It's good to get drunk," Wanyan Qianhua said. She drank another cup of wine and said, "Ah Jiu, tell me, why doesn't he like me?" No matter where she went, Wanyan Qianhua was dazzling. Many young masters from big clans and sects admired her. But the person she loved treated her like dirt. Fengjiu supported her chin with one hand and looked at her without saying anything. After a while, she smiled and said, "Sister, I'll give you some of my treasured wine." As she spoke, she took out a bottle of wine from her space and poured her a cup. "Sister, have a taste." Wanyan Qianhua drank it in one gulp. After it entered her mouth, she glanced at Fengjiu. Her beautiful eyes were charming and blurred. "Immortal drunken wine. Hee, it's the drunken immortal. Does it taste better after the modification?" Fengjiu said with a smile. "Are you trying to get me drunk?" Wanyan Qianhua said as he poured himself another cup of wine. "It's nothing. I just wanted to let you try my improved immortal drunken wine." Fengjiu smiled embarrassedly. "How many cups do you think I'll get drunk?" Wanyan Qianhua asked and drank the third cup. Just as he was about to pour another cup, his eyes started to shake. Fengjiu pursed her lips and smiled. "No matter how strong you are, you must be drunk after 3 cups. Otherwise, how could it be said that it was improved?" She smiled and looked at Wanyan Qianhua, who was drunk and lying on the table, and called out to the outside. "Who's outside?" "Master." Qin Xian and Ling Shuang came in. "Help her back to her room to rest. Tell people not to disturb her and let her have a good sleep," Fengjiu said. He stood up and brushed his robe. A layer of light flashed across his body and dispersed the smell of wine on his body. Ling Shuang and Qin Xian responded and helped Wanyan Qianhua out. Chapter 3351. Fengjiu, who was about to go out, stopped when she heard Leng Hua's voice. She looked back and said, "Yes, I'm going out for a while. If Sei asks, tell him I'll be back later." "Okay." Leng Hua didn't leave. Instead, he watched her turn and leave. Then he walked inside and happened to see Ling Shuang and Qin Xian walking side by side. He walked up to them. "Sister." Leng Hua called. "Yes, what's the matter?" Ling Shuang looked at him and asked. Today, only Luo Yu is guarding Hao outside. I wanted to let Guemo go, but he hasn't come back yet. I was thinking, sister, do you want to see Hao tonight? Hearing this, Ling Shuang nodded. Okay. She was also a little worried about Hao being outside. Would he be afraid at night? Leng Hua smiled and told her where Luo Yu was. After she left, he looked at Qin Xian and asked, Miss Wanyan is asleep? Qin Xian thought for a while and said, yes, she's drunk. Master said she should rest well and not be disturbed. Okay, then tell the servants not to disturb her rest. As he spoke, he lowered his voice and said, pay more attention to Elder Mei and the gatekeeper. Master said that the Black Tortoise True Monarch should be paying us a visit soon. Okay. Qin Xian also agreed. After a while, the two left. As the night deepened, the noises seemed to become quieter. In the celestial sect of the Blue Star, in a courtyard on a mountain, there was a bright room. Junju Shang was wearing a white robe and sitting in the room. He was holding a book in his hand and looking at the book. However, his mind was somewhere else. Feng Jiu, who was dressed in red, quietly landed on a tree in the courtyard. She had restrained her aura and was like a gust of night wind. She did not make any sound and naturally did not attract the attention of the absent-minded Junju Shang. Feng Jiu looked through the window at the man who was sitting and reading. When she saw him, she was stunned. He was hundreds of years old, but he looked like a man in his 30s. He was calm and cold. His temperament was different from the people she had seen before. Just by looking at the side of his face and his temperament, it had to be said that her sister's taste was indeed excellent. This kind of man was very unique and also very tasteful. Of course, in her opinion, he still couldn't compare to the one in her family. As the saying goes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Jun Jueshang, who was looking at the book, suddenly felt that someone was looking at him. Even if he didn't sense the other party's aura, he could feel the other party's gaze at this moment. Therefore, he, who was reading the book, picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. Suddenly, the teacup in his hand carried a fierce hidden force. It was like a hidden weapon, flying towards the window and towards the tree outside. Whoosh! The teacup flew past, creating a stream of air. Feng Jiu, who was staring at Jun Jueshang, suddenly saw the teacup flying towards her. She couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. She raised her hand and slightly tilted her body to reduce the force on the teacup. Then, she reached out and caught the teacup. The moment the teacup flew out, Jun Jueshang's heart skipped a beat. That was because he saw the red robe of the person hiding in the tree. When he saw the red robe, he immediately thought of Wanyan Qianhua. Chapter 3352. However, when that silhouette jumped down from the tree and entered his line of sight, he couldn't help but feel annoyed. It wasn't her. Feng Jiu held the cup in her hand and gently twirled it. She looked at Junju Shang, who slowly closed his eyes after seeing her. She couldn't help but curl her lips into a smile. It seemed like he had mistaken her for her elder sister. Both of them liked to wear red clothes. No wonder he had mistaken her for her elder sister. She smiled and slowly walked inside with a cup in her hand. Feng Jiu. Junju Shang looked at the woman who had walked in and asked with an indifferent expression. Even though he had asked that question, he looked confident. Obviously, even though he hadn't seen Feng Jiu before, he had guessed her identity. It's me. Feng Jiu smiled and nodded. She casually walked forward and sat down. She put the cup on the table and said, I have heard that the Xiaoyao sect's Junju Shang is extraordinary. Today, I see you in person. Indeed, hearing 100 times is not as good as seeing you once. You came to see me in the middle of the night. What's the matter? Asked Junju Shang. He put down the book in his hand and calmly looked at the girl in front of him. Fengjiu the ghost doctor's name could be said to have spread all over the world. However, he didn't have any relationship with her. Therefore, he was surprised to see her in the middle of the night. Fengjiu took out a teacup and poured herself a cup of water to drink as she said, "It's nothing. I just heard that you were here, so I wanted to come and see you." As she spoke, she played with the cup in her hand and smiled. "Sect Master, you don't know, right? Wanyan Qianhua and I are sworn sisters." Jun Ju Shang's eyes twinkled when he heard that. He closed his eyes and didn't say anything. "I don't like to talk in a roundabout way. I will just say it." She looked at him and said, "My elder sister's taste is very high. There are so many outstanding men but none of them can move her heart. I have always been curious. What kind of man will she fall in love with in the future? I didn't think that the patriarch would be like that." "Did she ask you to come?" Jun Jushang asked. Hearing this, Fengjiu sneered and glanced at him. "5 years ago, my sister mentioned you to me. When we met again 5 years later, I asked about you, but my sister said that the two of you had nothing to do with each other 5 years ago. So, when I heard that the sect master was in this sect, I thought that since I had nothing to do, I would like to see what kind of person this man that my sister fell in love with is. But now that I've seen him, I feel that he's just as so. She had originally wanted to see what kind of person Jun Ju Shang was and what kind of feelings he had for her sister. However, when she heard his question, she shook her head inwardly. It seemed that this person really didn't care about her sister. Otherwise, why would he ask such a question? How could someone as proud as Wanyan Qianhua ask her to come? However, according to her observation from the beginning until now, she felt that he didn't completely ignore her sister in his heart. She guessed that he didn't realize the different feelings he had for her, right? It was also true that an old man who only knew how to cultivate, if you asked him to say or admit that he was moved by Wanyan Qianhua, it really wouldn't be so easy. Not to mention other things, just the age of these two people was like a mountain between them. Chapter 33-53. It's late. The ghost doctor should be going back, Jun Ju Shang said indifferently, as if he hadn't heard Fengjiu. His expression was as indifferent as before. Fengjiu smiled and glanced at him, saying, "Yes, I'm going back. I just came here to take a look out of curiosity." She stood up, flicked her robe, and walked out. However, when she reached the door, she paused and looked back at Jun Ju Shang. "Oh, right. Sect Master doesn't seem to be in a good state. He must have encountered his inner demon. It's better to get rid of it as soon as possible. If you keep running away, it will only make it harder to control." With that, she tapped the ground with the tip of her foot, and her red figure flew into the night. Seeing her leave, Jun Ju Shang's eyes darkened. He reached out and touched his chest. There was a complicated and struggling look in his eyes. Since 5 years ago, there had been no peace in this place. He was originally a light sleeper, but gradually, he couldn't fall asleep. He knew that his inner demon had formed and could no longer be ignored. On the other side, after Fengjiu left Jun Ju Shang's place, CK and Mu Xian, who were waiting outside, saw her come out and greeted her. "Master, it's already so late. Why don't you rest in the sect tonight? Master's cave residence has always been cleaned. You can move in at any time," CK said. Because it was so late, although she was very strong, they still felt that it wouldn't be too late for her to go down the mountain tomorrow morning. As for this, they didn't have to worry about her going back to Four Corner City in the middle of the night. Fengjiu shook her head, saying, "No need. I told them that I would go back tonight. It's not suitable for me to stay here. I don't want my family to worry." She looked at the two and said, "You two go back too. There's no need to send me off. I can go out by myself." Then, she smiled, "Don't worry. I won't meet any danger. Even if there is, it will be danger that meets me. When they heard this, CK and Mu Xian exchanged glances and said, "Since Master has spoken in this way, then let's send Master out of the sect. If you send me off, the entire sect will probably know that I came at night tomorrow. Who knows what kind of trouble might happen." She smiled and waved her hand. "All right, let's go back." As she spoke, her figure flashed and she had already flown into the night. CK couldn't help but sigh as he watched the figure disappear into the night in the blink of an eye. Master really comes and goes without a trace. There aren't many people in this world who can fight with her. Yes. Both masters are very powerful. If it weren't for that bet, we wouldn't even be able to get close to her now, let alone be where we are today. Mu Xian also sighed. She only felt that many times, a split-second decision could change a person's life. The two of them stood there for a while before leaving as well. On the other side, Fengjiu, who had left the sect, was flying in the night. Her red figure was like a ghost as she shuttled through the darkness of the night, heading towards Four Corner City. However, just as she was about to leave the boundary of the sect, she unexpectedly noticed a few figures flitting through the forest. Their auras were actually demonic cultivators. Chapter 3354. Her figure flashed, and she retracted her aura and followed those people. She followed them in the night, but she didn't expect that she would follow them all the way to the back mountain of the sect. She raised her eyebrows slightly as she watched the devil cultivators enter the sect's back mountain. There were formations and barriers set up within the sect's territory. How were these devil cultivators able to enter the sect's back mountain as if there was no one around? Could it be that there was a spy? She followed closely and saw that these demonic cultivators had set up a barrier here. Once someone approached, the barrier would send out a warning, allowing the demonic cultivators to escape as quickly as possible. Looking at the darkness in front of her, her eyes flashed slightly. If it weren't for her cultivation, she probably wouldn't have been able to see that there was a barrier set up in the darkness. That layer of demonic power surged, and she could sense it without touching it. Her palms surged slightly, and a wave of spiritual aura surged. With a wave of her hand, the spiritual power in her palm quietly broke the barrier in front of her. Looking at the dissipated barrier and the dark demonic power that disappeared in the air, she curled her lips and walked forward. None of the demonic cultivators noticed that the barrier set up had been broken. At this time, more than 30 people were gathered together to discuss something. However, the two demonic cultivators who were originally talking stopped at the same time. They looked at each other, and one of them asked, "Did you feel it? Why do I feel that the barrier seems to have disappeared?" "You felt it too? Then it wasn't my imagination." The other demonic cultivator also said with a serious expression, "Who could it be? How could he break the barrier so soundlessly?" Hearing the two's words, the other demonic cultivators looked at each other. Someone asked, "What happened?" At this time, the two leaders calmed down and ordered, "You two, go outside and take a look. The rest of you, stay alert." "No need, I'm already here." A gentle voice came from the night. Almost at the same time that they heard this voice, the two demonic cultivators in the lead were shocked, and they quickly looked in the direction of the voice. With their cultivation, they actually didn't know that someone was quietly approaching. Moreover, from the sound of that voice, it seemed to be a woman. Was it the female venerable from the sect on Cerulean planet? However, when that person walked out from the shadows, the expressions of those devil cultivators changed, and even their voices were trembling uncontrollably. Fengjiu. The person in front of him was dressed in red. She had a beautiful face and a cold temperament. There was a faint smile on her lips. Who else could it be but Fengjiu? Almost at the moment they saw Fengjiu, the 30 or so demonic cultivators all retreated at the same time. They knew that Xianyuan Mo's and Fengjiu's strength was no longer the same as yesterday, especially when Xianyuan Mo's had agreed to fight Sovereign Tong Tian at Mount E. Now that they had encountered Fengjiu here, they really wanted to die. This was the back mountain of the Cerulean Planets sect. What was she doing here in the middle of the night instead of staying in Square City? Could it be that she found out about their plan? Fengjiu's clear eyes swept past those devil cultivators, and she chuckled. I haven't met a devil cultivator in a long time. Tell me. What are you all doing here in the middle of the night? Chapter 33:55. Let's go. Hearing her words, everyone's hearts trembled, especially the two devil cultivators in the lead. Almost without thinking, they threw out something from their sleeves. That thing hit the ground with a loud bang, and at the same time, black smoke filled the air. The devil cultivators took the opportunity to quickly scatter and escape. Fengjiu frowned, with a wave of her sleeve, she dispersed the smoke in front of her. At the same time, she released her pressure, and with a whoosh, a silver needle flew out from her hand, piercing the devil cultivators who were escaping in all directions. Those devil cultivators were too slow to escape, and after being pierced by the silver needle, they fell to the ground. Only the two devil cultivators in the lead escaped with their lives, and because of the loud bang, the people in the sect were alarmed. A venerable brought his disciples to the back of the mountain to investigate, and when they quickly followed the direction of the sound, they couldn't help but be startled. Ghost Doctor. The venerable in the lead recognized Fengjiu, and then looked at the 20 devil cultivators on the ground, and hurriedly asked, Ghost Doctor, what happened? Why did devil cultivators sneak into the sect's back mountain out of the blue? Fengjiu glanced at the person who came, then glanced at the devil cultivators on the ground, and said, I just happened to pass by, and saw a few devil cultivators walking around in the sect's territory, so I followed to take a look, but I didn't expect that there were dozens of people hiding here, the rest of them bit the poison and committed suicide, these two's chins were cut off by me, you guys bring them back for interrogation. She kicked the two devil cultivators at her feet. Yes, thank you Ghost Doctor. Hearing this, the venerable quickly thanked her, and ordered the disciples behind him to bring back the two devil cultivators who were still alive. However, when he turned around and was about to say a few more words to Fengjiu, he saw that the red figure who was standing in front of him just now had already disappeared. Master, she left. A disciple said softly. Deal with this corpse, then report back to the sect. The venerable said as he led them to dispose of the corpses. Then, he patrolled the surroundings before heading into the sect. Fengjiu, who was heading towards the city, stepped on the breeze and quietly entered the city. She didn't head towards the manor, but instead headed towards the slums that Wanyan Qianhua had told her about. It had only been a day. She really missed that little fellow. She wondered if he had gotten used to sleeping on his first night outside. She released her divine sense and soon found Luo Yu. She walked up to the tree he was on and saw that Ling Shuang was also there. She couldn't help but smile. Why is Ling Shuang here too? Do you miss Hao? Master. When the two saw her, they hurriedly bowed and greeted her. Guimo isn't back yet, so I came over to take a look, Ling Shuang said. Master, it's so late. Why aren't you resting yet? Luo Yu looked at her. He didn't expect her to come over so late. Was she worried about Hao? I just came back from a trip to the sect, so I wanted to see Hao before going back. Fengjiu looked at the house and asked the two about Hao's situation. After hearing about Hao's situation, she smiled and said, Ling Shuang, come in with me to take a look. Yes. Ling Shuang responded and followed her into the house. Master, those little beggars are sleeping in the bunk over there. Hao is sleeping in this room. Ling Shuang lowered his voice as he led her in. When they arrived at the room, Fengjiu smiled when she heard the calm breathing inside. Chapter 33:56. She walked forward and pulled the blanket up for Hao. Looking at his dirty little face, Fengjiu shook her head and smiled. She didn't stay for long and left after sitting by the bed for a while. When she was outside, Fengjiu looked at Ling Shuang and said, "You and Luo Yu stay here tonight. I'll have someone take your place tomorrow." "Yes." Ling Shuang replied. After watching her leave, he went to the tree where Luo Yu was. When Fengjiu returned to the residence, she saw Xianyuan Mose sitting on the bed with his eyes closed. When he heard her coming in, he opened his eyes and looked at her. "You're still awake. It's very late," Fengjiu said as she walked forward. She took off her outer clothes and walked forward wearing only her inner clothes. Just as she was about to turn over and sleep on the bed, he hugged her. "You went to see how her?" Xianyuan Mose hugged her and let her sit on his body. Fengjiu smiled and reached out to hug him. She leaned her head on his chest and said, "I went to the sect to see Zhen Zhishang. Then I went to see how, when I came back." "Oh. For Wanyan Qianhua?" "Yes." She replied and said, "I'm also curious. What kind of person is Zhen Zhishang? After seeing him tonight, I can't deny that he's very outstanding." "More outstanding than me?" Xianyuan Mose raised his eyebrows. His deep eyes were smiling. Hearing this, Fengjiu chuckled and leaned forward to peck his lips. "In my eyes, no one can compare to you." Hearing this, Xianyuan Mose's heart moved. Like a flower blooming, a smile appeared on his cold face. He looked at her in his arms and said, "Ah, Jiu's words are very moving. I like it very much." As he spoke, he lowered his head and kissed her lips. It wasn't a light kiss, but a deep and passionate kiss. The night was dark, and the crescent moon was hidden in the clouds. In the room, two figures were entwined on the bed like a pair of mandarin ducks. On the other hand, in the Sanctum of Sages, the members of the Sanctum of Sages were already waiting in the main hall early in the morning. As they waited, they began chatting with one another. "Looks like the saint will come out today. He has been in seclusion for 5 years. "Yes. That's fast. 5 years have passed in the blink of an eye. I wonder how much the saint's strength has improved in 5 years. Recently, I heard that Sovereign Tong Tian and Xianyuan Mose are going to battle at Mount E. Xianyuan Mose's strength is already at the God King level. Not bad, not bad. I heard that he is very young and is a cultivation genius rarely seen in 1,000 years. Hee, you don't know about this, do you?" An old man stroked his beard and chuckled. He looked at the crowd and lowered his voice. "Xianyuan Mose is the Emperor Star, and he complements Fengjiu's Phoenix Star. If not for the fact that they are destined by the heavens, do you think that anyone can be like them? They are indeed very powerful, but our Holy Son is not an ordinary person either." Another person said with a smile, "Just wait and see. The saint's strength will definitely be on par with Xianyuan Mose. Divine King level? Is that possible? After all, Divine King level isn't something that can be achieved just by thinking about it. Back then, I heard that if the Holy Son could cut off all emotions and desires, his cultivation method would reach the great accomplishment stage. The power of that would be indescribable." Chapter 3357. As the voice rang out, everyone's gaze turned towards the source of the voice. Mo Chen's white robe fluttered in the wind as he walked towards them. His otherworldly aura and the faint holy light that radiated from his body made him look extremely noble. If it was said that he had the temperament of a banished immortal in the past, the current him exuded an indescribable sense of nobility. It was as if looking at him for an extra second would be a blasphemy. Especially the faint layer of holy light that surrounded his body. It was as if he was bathed in holy light. He seemed to be right in front of them, but at the same time, he was out of their reach. "Holy Prince!" Everyone called out excitedly as they lowered their heads in unison and bowed respectfully. Mo Chen walked to the center of the hall and stood there quietly. His deep gaze swept across the crowd before him and he said, "You may all disperse. Elders, please stay behind." "Yes." Everyone responded and bowed their heads respectfully as they left the hall. In a short while, only the elders and Mo Chen were left in the large hall of sages. The elders exchanged glances and stepped forward. They cupped their fists and bowed, "Congratulations to the Holy Prince for coming out of seclusion." Mo Chen glanced at them, then turned around and sat down in the center of the hall. He ordered, "Tell me about Fengjiu and the others in the past 5 years." Hearing this, the elders paused for a moment before stepping forward. They sat down on the chairs on his left and right and briefly recounted the events of the past few years. Finally, the first elder said, "The Holy Prince came out of seclusion at just the right time. Some time ago, the Cerulean Star sect sent people to ask for our help in the battle against Sovereign Tong Tian. However, because Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu returned, things took a turn for the better. Now, Xianyuan Mose and Sovereign Tong Tian have agreed to battle at the peak of Mount E. There are still more than 20 days until now." At this time, the third elder said, "It's said that Xianyuan Mose is already a God King expert, but no one knows what level he is." The second elder's eyes were fixed on Mo Chen. He looked at him, paused for a moment, and said, "Saint, before the temple master went into seclusion, he told us that after the saint comes out of the sacred tower, we have to see if the saint has severed all emotions and desires, severed all ties of love, and obtained the saint power. Saint, do you think that in other words, he wanted Yi Futian to tell them that he had already inherited the saint energy from the holy sanctum while cultivating in the holy tower for the past 5 years? When Mo Chen heard this, the corners of his lips curled into a slight smile. He looked at the elder and asked, "Elder, in your opinion, have I already severed my 7 emotions and 6 desires? Have you obtained saint energy?" The second elder hesitated. How could he know whether or not he had severed his feelings for her? Did he not have the 7 emotions and 6 desires? He only knew that the layer of saint energy around his body was stronger than before. Perhaps, he had already obtained the saint energy from the holy tower. For a moment, the few elders did not speak, but their eyes fell on Mo Chen, sizing him up. They were not sure either, but seeing that he could come out of seclusion, he should have obtained the saint energy from the holy tower. "I'm going back to rest for a while, and will leave tomorrow. You can inform the temple master that he has come out of seclusion," Mo Chen said as he stood up, one hand behind his back and the other in front of him. Without waiting for them to speak, he walked towards the back of the hall. Chapter 3358. Mo Chen slowly walked towards the back of the palace. His steps were light and leisurely. As he walked, he looked at the sky. No one knew what he was thinking, but a dark light flashed across his deep eyes. He walked towards the back of the palace and returned to the main courtyard to rest. At the same time, he prepared to leave the divine palace tomorrow to meet Fengjiu and the others. 2 days later, outside the sky of the upper world, in another region, in a palace, a man dressed in a dark golden robe with a strong waist and a bear's back was striding towards the main palace. His footsteps were like the wind. Every step he took carried a thunderous and fierce aura. He strode in. Before he saw anyone inside, he spoke first. "Wife. Wife. What's wrong? Why do you look like you're in a hurry?" A beautiful woman in luxurious clothes came out to welcome him. Although she was dressed gorgeously, she did not look well. Her face was pale. The man, Sovereign Xuanwu, strode to her side. He laughed loudly and said, "Wife, Elder Mei sent news. Our son came back with Fengjiu and the others. He's now in Four Corner City." "Ah. Our son is back. Is he okay?" The beautiful woman sobbed. Tears fell from her eyes. She could not speak. When she thought of their child, she felt as if her heart was being cut by a knife. He was her biological child, but he could not grow up by her side. He was already 5 or 6 years old, but she had not seen him even once. How tall was he now? Was he fat or thin? Did he know that there was a mother like her? Wife, don't cry. This is good news. Sovereign Xuanwu said. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. He said, we had no choice back then. Now that he's growing well, you don't have to worry. Husband, we were incompetent parents. We only gave birth to him, but we never raised him. Husband, do you think he won't recognize us? The beautiful woman asked with tears falling from her eyes. She was anxious and worried. This monarch Black Tortoise was stunned. He had never thought of this problem. However, he still comforted them. He won't. He's our son. As long as we tell him clearly that we had no choice back then, I don't think he won't recognize us. The gorgeously dressed beauty leaned into his embrace and asked again, Husband, will they be willing to return the child to us? After all, they've raised the child for 5 or 6 years. I'm afraid their relationship is no less than ours. Don't worry. Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mo's aren't ordinary people. Naturally, they're different from ordinary people. It's our son's fortune to have a pair of adoptive parents like them. Besides, if they don't want to return the child to us, they wouldn't have agreed to let Elder Mei deliver the message to us. Although he had never met Xianyuan Mo's and Fengjiu, he was no stranger to them. He had been looking forward to meeting them. The beauty fell silent for a moment, and then she thought for a moment and said, Husband, let's go take a look first. If our son wants to follow them, let him follow. As long as he can come back to visit us often in the future, I'll be satisfied. Hearing this, Sovereign Xuanwu was stunned. He asked with a smile, Don't you miss your son? Don't you want to bring him back and raise him by your side? Chapter 33:59. She was worried that her son could not bear to part with Fengjiu and the others. She was also worried that if she brought him back against his wishes, he would be unhappy. After she gave birth to him, he was separated from her. Although mother and son were connected, she was also worried that her child would not grow up by their side and would not be close to them. Sovereign Black Tortoise looked at her. After a while, he said, I heard that the old man from Tongtian and Xianyuan Mo's have agreed to fight at Mount E. There are only 20 days left. That old man has fought with me for so many years. I know his strength very well. I'm afraid that Xianyuan Mo's, who has just become a divine king, is not his match. So I was thinking of taking advantage of this time to discuss with them and see if there is anything we can help with. This way, we can repay them for raising our son. Secondly, I also want to meet Fengjiu. According to Elder Mei, she has medical skills that can bring the dead back to life. I only hope to have the opportunity to heal my old injuries this time. Then I'll go to the storehouse to find some good things. I'll bring them over as a greeting gift. As the beauty spoke, she frowned and looked worried. But if both of us leave, won't others take advantage of us? Tongtian's people are not the only ones keeping an eye on us. It's okay. We'll disguise ourselves as ordinary cultivators. No one will know that we're not in the palace. Besides, I'll make the arrangements. Even if someone comes again, it's okay. He patted her hand, indicating that she did not need to worry. Okay, then I'll go prepare first. Let's leave tomorrow. She could not wait to see her son. Okay. Sovereign Black Tortoise smiled. To them, it did not take long to go to Four Corner City from here. It only took the time of a transportation array. While they were preparing, the people in Four Corner City were also busy with their own matters. In the main courtyard, Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua were playing chess while listening to Luo Yu's report on how Er's matters outside these few days. Speaking of which, I haven't visited Hao in the past few days. Today's weather looks pretty good. Sis, let's go together. Fengjiu looked at Wanyan Qianhua and said. Wanyan Qianhua raised her beautiful eyes to look at Fengjiu. After thinking for a moment, she said, that's a good idea. That child has been outside for a few days. Since he has been performing well these past few days, why don't we pick him up later and bring him to a restaurant to eat something? Fengjiu stood up when he heard this, and he said to Luoyu, since Wei Feng and Gumo are guarding Hao, then you can rest at home. Yes. Luoyu replied, and then retreated. Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua walked forward and happened to bump into Guan Shilin. Fengjiu called out, brother, we're going to see Hao, Are you coming with us? That's fine too. I have nothing to do anyway. Guan Shilin said as he walked towards them. Master, let Qin Xian and my sister go together. It'll be more convenient for Master to do whatever he wants with them. Leng Hua walked over from nearby with Leng Shuang and Qin Xian by his side. Fengjiu smiled when he saw this and said, all right. There are so many people here. Let's take the spirit deer carriage. With that, he walked out with Wanyan Qianhua. Then we'll be leaving. When we come back, we'll bring back some spiced beef to go with wine. Guan Shilin said to Leng Hua, and he walked out with a smile. Chapter 3360. On the other side, in the dilapidated house, Hao walked in with his short legs and shouted, I'm back. He had adapted to life these few days, and there was some excitement in his tone. He thought that if his mother knew that he could be independent and could feed so many people, she would be very happy. The little beggars in the house heard Hao's voice and quickly ran out. They all surrounded him. What's good to eat today? Is there meat today? Come here. Hao shouted. He came to the table at the side and took out the things from his Qianquan bag. The little beggar's eyes flashed when they saw him take out the things from the small bag and put them on the table. In particular, a few of the older beggars stared straight at Hao's bag. You guys eat first. I'll go in and drink a cup of water. Hao said to them. After putting the food on the table, he walked in. He lived in a room by himself, so when he came in, he climbed onto the chair and poured a cup of water. When he was about to drink it, he was stunned when he smelled the water. He thought that he smelled it wrongly, so he went closer to smell it. Someone put medicine in the water. Who did it? He thought in a daze. Because his mother also taught him how to identify medicine in Dan Wang Valley, he could easily smell that the medicine in the water was muscle-weakening powder, and it was the cheapest kind. His mother helped him recuperate his body. Not to mention this, even poison couldn't poison him. However, after living outside for a few days, he knew that he had to be clear about everything. He couldn't be careless. Therefore, he planned to beat them at their own game and see who wanted to harm him. Outside, the little beggars were eating happily. The older ones looked into the room from time to time. Because of nervousness, the hands holding the food trembled slightly. It wasn't until they heard the sound of cups breaking and falling that they put down the food in their hands and ran in quickly. When they saw Hao lying on the ground with cold sweat on his face and a weak look on his face, the youngest girl quickly went forward to help him up. What happened to you? Hao leaned on the little girl and said, I suddenly have no strength in my body. Ah. How can this be? The little girl asked worriedly. Does your body hurt? The medicine is working. The older beggar suddenly said excitedly. Hearing this, a few of the younger ones were startled and looked at him in astonishment. What did you say? Take the bag from him. There's a lot of money and a lot of treasures. As the older beggar spoke, they suddenly pushed the youngest girl away and went to snatch the inconspicuous bag tied around Hao's waist. Woo! The little girl was pushed aside and her body fell to the side. Her hand pressed on the broken cup and blood immediately flowed out. She sobbed but climbed up and squeezed forward to protect Hao. Don't take his things. Don't take his things. Chapter 33:61. Hao pursed his lips and stared coldly at the few beggars when he saw the little girl standing in front of him and using her bleeding hand to slap the bigger beggars. Go away. One of the beggars pushed the little girl away, but she pounced on him again. At this moment, the bigger beggar shouted at the other beggars, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and help. After we snatch his bag, we'll give you some silver." The beggars were originally a little afraid, but when they heard the last sentence, their eyes lit up. They hurriedly went forward to help pull the little girl away and pressed her firmly to the ground. Hao sat leaning against the corner of the table, looking weak and motionless. He watched as the beggars worked together to deal with him and even pressed the little girl to the ground. At this moment, the little guy felt a fire burning in his heart. Until he saw the Qianquan bag at his waist being snatched away by those beggars and saw them taking out the things inside in front of him, he asked, "Why are you snatching my things?" He saved them and brought back delicious food for them. Why did they still want to snatch his things? These aren't your things. These are the things you snatched from those two people. Why should they only give their things to you? The bigger beggar said. He looked curiously at the few Dharma treasures taken out from the Qianquan bag and played with them excitedly. Hao looked at them fixedly. No one knew what he was thinking. After a long time, he said, "I'm too good to you." His mother had told him that one should not have the heart to harm others, but one should always be on guard against others. Before this, he felt that these beggars would not harm him because he had saved them and they were very weak. However, after today's incident, he understood some things. Some things that he would only understand after experiencing it himself. What happened today was a lesson for him. If it wasn't for his ability to distinguish between medicines, if it wasn't for the fact that he wasn't afraid of these medicines, then he could only lie here powerlessly and be robbed of everything on him, or even his life. Let's break one of his legs and one of his hands. So that he won't find trouble with us after the effects of the medicine wear off. One of the beggars said as he stared at Hao, who was leaning there. He inexplicably felt that his eyes made him fearful. Because of fear, he wanted to destroy him. He was afraid that once he recovered, they would be caught by him. Therefore, he could only cripple him while he could not move. Hearing this, the beggars all looked at each other. The smaller ones were a little scared. We don't dare. How about this? We'll leave this square city and go somewhere else. He won't be able to find us. Just in case, it's better to break his hands. This guy is too ruthless. You've forgotten that he killed people before. If he recovers, he will definitely kill us. Oh, he still has a dagger. As he said this, the bigger one was about to search his body. At this moment, the little girl who was pressed to the ground cried out, "No, no, don't break his arms and legs, don't. Woo woo. With them, were of him. Were." Chapter 33:62. Due to the strength of that kick, the little girl let out a muffled groan and spat out a trace of blood from her mouth. Seeing this, Hao's face darkened and the aura on his body became extremely cold. He stared at the beggar who came forward and reached out to grab his hand and break it. Crack! The sound of bones breaking was heard and instantly frightened all the beggars. Just as the beggar screamed, Hao's voice was heard. "Looking for the dagger? It's here." Hao's voice was heard and the inconspicuous but sharp dagger had appeared in his hand. With a flash of cold light, he directly broke the tendons in the beggar's hand. As the beggar screamed, the blade turned and directly pierced his foot, breaking the tendons in his foot. Shrill screams sounded and scared the little beggars out of their wits. However, Hao took a big step forward and blocked everyone's escape. Seeing the little beggars who were originally running towards the door retreating with pale faces, he said coldly, "Did I allow you to leave? Don't kill us. We don't want to die." The little beggars cried and begged and directly knelt down. "It's not me, it's not my idea, it's him, it's his idea, it's his idea, it's none of our business," the older beggars said as they pointed at the beggar who was lying on the ground and screaming. Not far outside, Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua stood on a tree and watched. They originally wanted to see what Hao was doing and did not expect to see such a scene. "What do you think your son will do?" Wanyan Qianhua asked. Fengjiu's eyes flashed and said, "Cripple one of their hands and one of their legs, just like the beggar inside. However, I don't think he will do anything to those little beggars who are in a passive position." Wanyan Qianhua shook his head and sighed softly. "This child has already been raised into a monster by all of you, yet you still let him out to train. If he trains too much, he will mature too early. Look at what he's going through now. It's not something an ordinary child would experience." Fengjiu nodded in agreement. "Yes, I didn't expect him to grow so quickly. It's only been a few days, but his ability to adapt and be independent is beyond my expectations." The two of them watched from the tree. They didn't intend to show themselves to help. They just wanted to see how he would deal with it. In that dilapidated courtyard, Hao really did as Fengjiu said. He crippled a hand and a leg of a few of the bigger beggars. As for those who were in a passive position, he did not touch them. "Leave. You're not allowed to appear in Four Corner City. Otherwise, if I see you again, I won't let you off like this time," Hao warned. After watching those people rush out of the door, he went to the little girl's side and helped her up. "I'll bandage you." As Hao spoke, he put away the Cosmos sack and all the things on the ground back into the sack. The little girl clearly hadn't recovered yet. She stared blankly at him. You didn't use the medicine?" "Yes." Hao replied with a straight face. After applying medicine for her, he used a strip of cloth to bandage her hand. When he sensed that someone was coming, he looked up. When he saw that familiar figure, his eyes couldn't help but light up. He quickly stood up and pounced on the figure that was slowly walking over. Chapter 33-63. Hao ran forward. Just as he was about to pounce forward, he remembered that he was dirty and couldn't help but stop. Fengjiu bent down and was about to catch him, but he retreated. She couldn't help but smile. "What's wrong? You haven't seen your mother for a few days. You don't want your mother to carry you?" Hao's little face reddened. "Mother, Hao is dirty." When they appeared, Wei Feng and Gu Mo, who were hiding in the shadows, had already been ordered to take the little beggars who had fainted from the pain of having their tendons cut off. In the large courtyard, there was only Fengjiu's group and the little girl who walked out with her short legs and looked at them blankly. Those people were so beautiful, and the clothes they wore were so nice. However, why did the little beggar call the woman in red his mother? Fengjiu squatted down with a smile and pulled Hao in front of her. She smiled and said, "It's fine. You'll be fine after you go back and take a bath and change your clothes." "But mother, it hasn't even been 10 days. He also wanted to go home and see his mother, but his mother said that she had to adapt to the outside world for 10 days. Hao's performance has been very good these past few days. Then there's no need for 10 days. Mother specially came to take Hao to eat." She rubbed his head and smiled at the little girl behind him. "If you like that little girl, bring her home." At this time, the little girl carefully walked forward and tugged at Hao's tattered sleeve. "Little beggar, why do you call her mother? Do you want to go with them?" Then what about me? She's my mother." Hao thought for a moment and said, "Follow me." Yes. The little girl happily responded. She then looked at the beauty in red who was looking at her with a smile and asked in a small voice, "Why do you have a mother?" Fengjiu smiled and stood up. She held Hao Er's hand and said, "Let's go." She brought him out and said, "This is mother's sworn sister, Wanyan Qianhua. You can call her Aunt Hua." Aunt Hua. Hao Er called and looked at her. "Good girl," Wanyan Qianhua replied with a smile. He said to the little girl, "Come with us." Thus, they brought the two children to the restaurant. On the other side of the restaurant, Roada restaurant was closed at this time. Inside the restaurant, the waiters were busy, and Leng Shuang and Qin Xian were waiting behind. When they saw Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua returning with Hao Er and a little girl, the two went up to greet them. "Master. Leng Shuang, go to the clothing store and buy a few sets of clothes for the little girl. Qin Xian, have the waiter prepare some water for them to bathe in." Fengjiu instructed and brought the two children to the courtyard of the restaurant. "Yes." The two of them replied and immediately turned to leave. The shopkeeper personally brought the two children to bathe, and Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua sat in the courtyard. Wanyan Qianhua poured a glass of wine and said, "Are you going to leave the little girl with Hao Er?" "Yes, she looks like a good girl, but she still needs to be trained," Fengjiu said and took a sip of wine. Not long after, Guan Shilin came in from outside. You're back. I just went out to buy some things. Come, try the spiced beef I brought back," Guan Shilin said and took out a portion for them. He looked around and asked, "Where's Hao Er? Did you bring him back?" You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.